Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is my Xenoblade Chronicles 3 discussion podcast. This is one of the best games I've played in a very long time, and I really wanted to take some time to discuss it with all of you. But yeah, especially here I have Days 3X. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We're about to talk about the best game in the history of games.
Apparently. I'm still very new friends with you, I'd say. We met on Twitter not long ago, just through Xenoblade, I think. And I think we're becoming fast friends. And I just saw your posts on Twitter, and I thought you'd be someone that would be really good to discuss this game with.
Yeah, I
Because I
see.
feel
I'm
like we
one
have
of
a
the
lot
s-
of
the
shared
few.
thoughts.
Yeah, I'm one of the few smart people who understands this game.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I feel like a lot of the fandom is kind of on the same page with the themes of this game. Like it's quite anti-establishment, but I don't know. There's definitely some people that just don't think about it too much.
Well,
And I, yeah. What do you think? What's your take on it?
yeah, there definitely are. I'm definitely not the only person who can clearly see that it's like an anti-capitalist sort of story. But I think for a lot of people, when they came into this game, their expectations were basically like, we're going to get something with tons of lore about the whole like universe of the
Mm.
Xenoblade series, and they're going to combine all the characters from the previous games in some grand finale that's super epic and has all these cheesy lines, and it's just like um that's not how like you judge a narrative. You're supposed to judge a narrative by like trying to like understand it for what it
Hmm.
is,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
feel like that's why a lot of people, because a lot of
Yes,
people, if you
I
look
do
at their
agree with that.
disappointment with it, it's definitely because they focused more on what they wanted out of it and less about what the game was trying to say.
Yeah, I think you've like really hit the nail on the head. Just before we like really get into it, I'm just putting up a little title as professional as I am. Xenoblade 3 discussion podcast spoiler warning for all the games. Yeah, so we are going to be getting into heavy spoilers for this stream, so I expect it's not going to be a huge turnout. I won't be surprised if there's like not really anyone in chat. But I still am very excited to record this and upload it to YouTube. But yeah, like we're going to be getting into spoilers quite quickly for all of the Xenoblade series, except for X, I think. So, and we might even reference a little bit of Xenogears and Xenosaga, though I haven't played those games, so we will be light on spoilers in that category. But in terms of like Xenoblade Chronicles 1, 2, 3, and the DLC for those games, we will be spoiling that. So I guess before we get into it, like too deep, let's like we'll go over like a non-spoiler overview just for those people that might be tuning in who want to know what Xenoblade 3 is all about, and before we start getting into the heavy stuff. And I think, yeah, just to like go on that point before we lose it, I do think you've touched on something poignant there that the it kind of feels like just not just Xenoblade, but just gaming in general. We're kind of in this point where people are obsessing over lore and like not thinking
Yes.
about themes of stories, and that's like really become apparent with Xenoblade 3. But yeah, it's
Well,
kind of a
it's
thing.
everything. It's
Yeah.
everything now. It's like people, they consume media because it like fills out like a wiki page of trivia for them, not
Yes.
because they care
Yes.
about the actual story. And it's like I'm not against lore or anything, but lore is like a tool that assists a narrative. It's not the narrative, right? Like
Yes.
obviously I like some lore heavy series. The Trail series, I love that series. I play Arknights, full of lore. The Towaru, like a certain magical index, full of
Mm,
lore. But like
yeah.
those series aren't good just because of the lore, but they actually have like interesting stuff to back it up. Xenoblade is
Hmm.
the same way. Like it's actually interesting mathematically. It's not just all these crazy metaphysics that I don't understand. No, there's more to it than crazy metaphysics we don't understand. Metaphysics are perhaps the most important thing.
Yeah. I mean, like I you look at me. I'm very well known for like loving my deep lore series and like analyzing the lore and stuff. But I think we get a bit carried away as like a collective internet thing of like focusing too much on the lore. Some people more than others, and I do think that's maybe a byproduct of the MCU. I don't know, like the kind that's kind of the impression I get, where the MCU has kind of primed audiences into like really focusing hard on what a particular entry in the MCU adds to the lore. Like it's all about the post-credit scene. It's all about how this character is going to be relevant for some other movie. Like people like it seems like people are becoming too focused on the big picture and not enough on what the characters are actually doing in front of our eyes. Um,
You see,
yeah.
this is why I'm based because I don't watch Marvel movies.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's a trend. I think that's like a trend that the Marvel has really like sparked, where character studies are taking second seat to, is this character as powerful as Goku? What
I
are
don't know.
the implications of this character appearing at this place and time? And it,
I don't know. I don't know if it's specifically a Marvel thing. I feel like this always kind of been a thing. It's just because like I feel like a lot of people just don't want to consume media to think about it. They just want to consume media sort of like passively to like pass the time or for like the sake of fandom, I guess. Because the thing is when it
mm.
comes to like fandom, it's very easy to discuss basically anything besides the actual content of the narrative.
Yeah, you don't really need to think too much. I mean, not to say that some of these slow speculation things don't require a lot of critical thinking, but it's not analytical. It's just kind of like looking at facts and um, yeah, just it's basically just taking facts and trying to piece them together in a way that makes sense. It's like treating media as a puzzle to put together instead of more like something more artistic. That's something we can derive personal meaning from. Um,
Yeah, like I understand that the wiki writers are like they're like the backbone of society and they need to understand their stuff, but like, you know, there's more to it than the wiki articles, you know?
It's fun. It must. I must sound hypocritical as a Tuaru fan saying stuff like this because I really do like love lore and stuff. But we need to be like we need to have a balance, right? We need to not take the lore and make that the only thing we care about. We need to like process the lore in context of like the smaller things, the smaller character moments, and the artistic meaning we can derive from a work. And that's something I really want to focus on in this podcast because we could talk all day about the lore implications of Xenoblade 3 and how cool that is. I'm sure we will get a little bit of that in this podcast, but first and foremost, I want to more so discuss the messaging of Xenoblade 3, like the meaning, the politics of Xenoblade 3, the philosophy, and how that all plays into it. Because, gosh, I think all of that is fantastic and some of the best writing I've seen in a long time, even though it's like got some problems, and we can definitely talk about that. Overall, like just the theming and messaging of this game is second to none for me.
I
But
think
yeah, go on.
oh, go ahead. I was gonna say what I think makes it work so well is because remember when they advertised this game and they were like, the main theme of the game is life, right?
Mm,
Like that's how Nintendo advertised it, right? So when you
life
think
and
about
death,
like
yeah.
the whole like meaning of life type of thing, sort of the
Mm,
intuitive thing that you come to is like the meaning of life is to live your life to the fullest, right?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
like anyone can say that,
I
but
was a
it
little
doesn't
bit
always
hesitant when I
mean that.
first heard that because like a story claiming that they're going to tackle something like as nebulous as life, like that's a very big claim. That's something that most writers who would attempt to do so stumble at, like, and can't really put forward any sort of like profound
Yeah, because
messaging about.
anyone can say the meaning of life is to live your life to the fullest, and literally any writer could do that, right? It's the same thing
Mm,
as like the power of friendship. Any writer can write about
mm,
friendship, but like if all you're doing is writing about the power of friendship in place of having anything meaningful to say, you're kind of just like copying other writers who also write about the power of friendship or who write about any sort of like vague thing like the meaning of life, you know?
mm.
So you got to like contextualize that theme in the context of like whatever else the story is about, and I
Yeah.
think that's what makes Xenoblade 3 work so well
Mm.
because it contextualizes the meaning of life in a political sense. Like,
Yes.
yes, the meaning of life is to live your life to the fullest, but how do we live our lives to the
Mm-hmm.
fullest? What's stopping us from doing that? what can we do to create a world where we can live our lives to the fullest, right? And
Yeah.
that's basically what Xenoblade 3 is about.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that's something a lot of writers are afraid of is like tackling the political reality in a story, and in our lives really, because it's very easy to talk about philosophical ideas of like the meaning of life and stuff in an abstract sense without really, engaging with it in a more material sense of eh, sorry, I'm speaking vaguely, but the point I'm trying to make is yeah, like philosophy is only the point where you separate philosophy from an armchair sort of thing where you're just like something you engage with on an abstract level, sipping tea and chatting with your fellow chaps about the meaning of life versus philosophy as a guiding tool for how to live our lives is whether or not we like incorporate the material and political reality that we live in. And I think that's something that Takahashi has really tapped into with this game. And it's definitely like these are themes that he's been writing his entire career, but I feel like this is the first game that really resonated with me. Okay, sorry, I shouldn't say that. I haven't played Xenogears and Xenosaga yet, so they might do it just as well. So I'm a fake Xeno fan. I know. I'm sorry. You can throw your objects at me now.
They
But like,
they do it they do it well, just not as well as Xenoblade 3. Xenoblade 3 goes kind of hard.
have you played all of the Xeno games?
So I mentioned this earlier to you, like in the group chat before, not the group chat, the DM before, but I haven't played Xenogears and Xenosaga, but I watched
Mm,
like a story walkthrough because I didn't have access to the games at the time. I still don't. I could if I wanted to. I'm just lazy. But also, I didn't want to actually play the games because I hear they're like really dated. So I just watched like the
yeah,
story cutscenes and stuff.
yeah, it's fun.
So I pretty much, I want to say I know the whole story, but they're also like super dense with lore and a lot of things happening, and it's really complicated. And I can remember maybe like 5% of what happened in both those games.
Yeah, yeah, that's perfectly valid. But yeah, I just think Xenoblade 3 has this real sense of storytelling that none of the other Xenoblade games I've played really accomplish. It just kind of brings everything together, and it just really hit in a way that's very like personal to me. Um,
Yeah,
no,
the the funny thing you were mentioning that philosophy, I feel it's like the pseudo-intellectual version of like lore, where it's like people focus so much on the philosophy, but not about like the material reality of it.
yeah,
But
that's a good
the
point.
the thing the thing I think makes Xenoblade 3 stand out compared to not just like other Xenoblade games, but also JRPGs, is I feel like it's probably the best game at giving you the idea that the creators actually mean what they say. Because
Yes, yes.
if you've played JRPGs, like they're all like political to some extent, right? And they all have
Mm,
themes about like we got to have hope for a better world. We can do this if we work together,
mm,
stuff like that. Like stuff that's supposed to like give you hope and inspire you. But the thing
mm.
is, it's been so like ubiquitous in the JRPG genre that it kind of like when I question myself, I'm thinking like, do they really mean it, or are they just saying it because it's like a trope at this point?
Yeah,
Xenoblade 3 is like by far the best game at getting me to think like, no, it's definitely not a trope. They clearly mean what they say,
yeah.
and
They
they mean it
commit
hard.
to it. They really commit to everything they're saying, and they're like, "We're not just. This isn't just lip service. We're going to show you exactly what we mean by everything we're saying." And it. Okay, I really want to talk spoilers now, but I'm going to hold myself back just a little bit longer. Now, why don't we just take a little bit of the podcast to talk about the gameplay? Because I think this is the most fun game, Xeno game that's been created so far, in my experience. I quite enjoyed Xenoblade 1, but it is so dated now when you play Xenoblade 3. Like, it's just Xenoblade 3 just improves on the combat and the gameplay in every way from the previous games. I think it builds
Thing
on
about
them.
Xenoblade 1, thing about Xenoblade 1 is I just use Shulk because he's broken, and then and he's easy to use, and I just don't think much.
Yeah, and, Xenoblade 1 and all the other Xenoblade games, they had the problem of not being able to control more than one character, which is fine. You can kind of turn your brain off, and it's the CPU will mostly do their job unless they're melee. But yeah, like now, if we want more like tactical gameplay, we can actually switch between the characters we're controlling at any time, and I think that's so cool. I just think that's something that
Uh,
should have been in the series from the start. And you don't have to use it, but the
confession,
fact that it's there just makes me so happy.
Yeah, confession. I actually didn't use the party switching all that much. I usually just focused on one character because like switching between party members just like feels weird to me.
No,
I don't mean it like it's a flaw or anything. It just
I get
it's
you.
it's like a mental block if that makes sense.
It's pretty galaxy brained. Like I think the main time I used it was for controlling Ouroboros stuff. Um, that's like the main use I had. But you know, I feel like if you really wanted to go hardcore and like micromanage the hell out of it, you can in this game. I just think having that option is so cool.
There's some Xenobladers on Twitter who will be like switching so fast that I'm just like, how do you know
Yeah.
what character you stopped on? And they do the like they have like the optimal character setups. They're fighting the super bosses, and they're just like, watch me beat this thing in like 5 seconds. And they're like swapping the characters immediately, used so that they can get like the smash art,
So
and the
cool.
smash art takes out like 90% of their HP. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
man, we're playing different games.
Kind of. I mean, you really can play this game how you want. They even included an auto battle feature in this one. You can't use it for like main story battles and bosses, but for general battles, you can just make the gameplay itself if you really wanted to. So there's
Yeah,
lots
it's
of accessibility
accessibility.
options. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Lots
Yeah,
of
like
like, you know, you don't have to grind if you don't want to. There's very much like options to just skim through the game if you only want the main story. But
Yeah, like the thing is, Xenoblade 2 compared to Xenoblade 1 had like a lot more variety to the gameplay, and then Xenoblade 3 is like, okay, what if we just like double down on that? And then like there's
yeah.
all these different classes, all these different arts, all these different builds, and if you're like really hard commit, you can like try to optimize every little thing, or you can just use the auto
Mm,
build, which I did all the time because like
mm.
I don't want to spend half the game in the menus, but if you want to spend half the game in the menus, you could just do that.
I spent half the game in the menus. I'm definitely that guy. But yeah,
It depends on the game for me, but I just wanted to like, man, I gotta find out what happens next in
yeah,
this side quest.
yeah, right? Like the side quest in this game is so good, and the way they tie into the narrative is perfect. Like it just the game really made me care about the side quests in this one, which is something Xenoblade 1 really struggled with for me. It's just I didn't care about the side content
Yeah,
in
I do
1.
feel like the side quests just continually got better in each game. But the thing
Yeah.
about side quests in Xenoblade 3 is that like most JRPGs don't justify side quests in terms of the narrative because like even Xenoblade 3 has this issue where like it doesn't actually make any sense to do side quests in the context of the main narrative because you're supposed to be like rushing to get
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah,
the
yeah.
the
Sure.
sword, right? So like the idea of taking time and like fast traveling back, like when you do the Xeon Ascension quest, you have to go all the way back to the beginning of the game, and like logically it doesn't make any sense to go all the way back to the start just to do a quest and then continue your journey, right? But the thing
Sure.
is that even if it's not justified in the narrative, the individual elements of the side quest are so well written for the most part that there's still value to be had even if it's not canon. You know
Well,
what I mean?
what I would say as a counter to that is logically it doesn't make sense, especially when you get to the post game. Like technically, the post game takes place in a brief a brief hour of time before like after you save a character and before you fight the final boss. Like it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, because
um,
like why would you leave the final dungeon just to do
yeah,
some side quest and then
it,
go back? Like it doesn't make sense.
it makes zero sense, but whatever. It's Ionius. Time is frozen. They can do this shit, I guess. Oops. Wait, I guess we're getting into spoilers now. Oh no, I dropped that without even thinking.
It's a minor thing. It's a minor thing with no context, but yeah, like so even if they don't have like a canon place in the narrative, it's like a mini story that like I don't know whoever wrote these short stories. I don't know if Takahashi wrote the side quest or like
Yeah,
if
who
his
knows?
employees. It could have been the employees. I know they have a lot of creative freedom, like
Mm.
just their average Monolith Soft employees. But I don't know. There's some good short story writers, like for real.
Anyway,
Some of these
the
mini
point I
quests are
was
so good.
yeah, the point I was trying to make is like they don't make sense logically, but thematically they make perfect sense.
Oh yeah, I
Um,
agree with that completely.
yeah, and I guess I'm gonna drop the full spoiler warning now. We're gonna start getting into this stuff a bit heavier now. Um,
Yeah, especially if you want to talk about the side quests, like what they mean in terms of the
yeah,
narrative, like
yeah,
thematically, because the
yeah.
side quests just go hand in hand with the main themes of even the political themes of the narrative.
Yeah,
It
so
really
I'm just
does.
going to say to everyone, if you don't want to be spoiled, now is your time to leave. I highly encourage you to check out Xenoblade Chronicles 3. It is, in my opinion, the best game on Switch and one of the best RPGs I've ever played. It's honestly a modern classic, and everyone needs to experience it. Even if you don't
You
like the other Xenoblade games, you should try this one. 100%.
you
I
could say
stand
it's
by
peak fiction. You could say it's
that.
peak fiction.
Absolutely. Peak fiction, peak game. Like it's just the Britta from Food for Dogs said it's the apotheosis of Xenoblade and the Xeno series. And I think that's a great way of putting it. It just kind of like takes everything that came before and refines it, and I won't say perfects. I still think there's room for improvement, but it is absolutely the best game to come out of this team since they started. And considering how the track record of a lot of like over ambitious games that are kind of like really rough around the edges, this game gets it right. It's got amazing gameplay, amazing story. The gameplay is well like tutorialized. Like it actually teaches the player the mechanics quite well, which is something Xenoblade games have struggled with in the past. It's fun, it's deep, and it just all
It's
comes together.
pretty. It's a
It's
pretty ass
very
game.
pretty, yeah. But yeah, so we're gonna start talking about spoilers now. I would say like if you like were someone who has no interest in Xenoblade and you're watching this for whatever reason, maybe stick around. We're gonna spoil some shit, but who knows? For some people, getting a few spoilers might actually encourage them to check the game out. Like, I definitely know that's the case for some people. So I'll just put that out there. But we are going into spoiler mode starting now. Okay, so Xenoblade is about communism. Specifically Xenoblade 3, especially. Um, this game, just like, I've really very much been engaging in a lot of political theory and learning and teaching myself a lot of this stuff. And it amazed me how much playing this game. It's just like, wow, this is just Takahashi going fucking full on, like, okay, let's bring the material into the philosophical. Let's talk about the political reality we live in and what we can actually do about our situation through the context of
Yeah,
this fantasy game about characters with magical swords fighting and
yeah. Like I'm no expert on like communist socialist theory or whatever, but I dabble a little bit, and I don't know. At some point, like the farther you go into the game, the more you realize like, yeah, it's pretty blatant at this point that this is just like the Communist Manifesto 2.0.
yeah. Takahashi's Communist Manifesto.
Required reading the Communist Manifesto.
He does quote Karl Marx at least once in this game.
Unironically, yeah, he does.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
I
like
actually have a question about that though, because I was wondering when it happened for you. At what point in the game did you start to realize, like, wait a second, is this about like capitalism is bad? Like, what
very
point in the
early.
game did you actually? Very
Very
early.
early.
Okay,
Yeah.
what point specifically?
Um, I think it was when I first saw the first Mobius. Maybe the second Mobius was when it really clicked for me.
Y-
Um,
Console K.
I forget their numbers. Like console D, I guess was the first one, or JD.
Yeah, JD
Um,
was the first one. It wasn't at that point for me. It was Console K,
K, yeah,
where
K is definitely where
they're
it really came together.
yeah, because like they're sucking the life out of the warring nations, or whatever. You find out they're like controlling both sides, and then
Yes.
but the part that kind of clicked for me was when they took off the helmet and they find out that he's this old dude, and I'm just like, wait a
Yeah.
second, we
Yeah.
got these old ass motherfuckers that are controlling things from the background, and they are like forcing the youth into this like impossible situation where
Mm.
they're extracting their like labor, I guess you could say. It's they're fighting, but that's like the
Yeah.
labor,
Yeah.
and they're like sucking out the life, which is like sucking out their surplus value, their money. And I'm just thinking like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, is this about why is this about some like anti-establishment shit? And then like the further I go into the game, and I'm just like, oh, so this is just about why capitalism is bad.
Yeah.
Then you get to the calling iota stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
then you start hearing like all the philosophical dialogue about like the world being evil and all that kind of stuff,
Yes.
and you have all these moments of just like rage against the machine,
Mm-hmm.
like the machine that is Mobius, like.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking like, man, this game is like proletarian rage, the game,
It
like
is. Like we had a
like
little
that.
bit of this in like Final Fantasy VII and many JRPGs, but this one really feels like it's committed to the point more than any other RPG I've ever played.
Yeah, like this is actually another reason why I was, mentioning the whole like they actually believe this shit because like Final Fantasy VII is like pretty overt with its political themes,
Mm,
especially now that I played because I played the remake earlier and there's literally a scene where they call Shinra fascist. So like,
yeah,
yeah, they believe it, but then also like Square Enix is doing NFTs and I'm just like, what?
yeah,
That's kind of
yeah.
contradictory. I don't know if it's like the same people who worked on the game or if it's just like the higher up executives or whatever. But
Yeah,
like,
I'm sure. Like at every level of like video game development, it's always like the working class developers that are like being like overworked to get these games out. The ones with real artistic vision, and then at the top you have the CEOs making the decisions that no one agrees with. It's
but
almost
like,
always like
yeah,
that.
I would say that Xenoblade 3 definitely goes harder than Final Fantasy 7, which is funny when you think
Yeah,
about how the original Xenogears was actually supposed to be Final Fantasy 7, and
yeah,
then
yeah,
they were
exactly.
like, they were like, Takahashi, this is too confusing. Make your own game.
Yeah,
And
literally.
that's not even a joke. That's actually what happened. And
That's
because the
yeah,
game had, yeah, and because the game had less funding and less time given to them, less resources, because it wasn't Final Fantasy, they had to like completely rush the second disc and just make the
yeah.
entire thing narration,
It's
which is
kind of
unfortunate.
like you look at it through the history of Monolith Soft and Takahashi, and it really feels like they've been trying to make one game all this time.
It,
Just
it
like,
really does. I mean, when you consider how many elements of Xenogears is like prevalent throughout Xenosaga and throughout the
mm-hmm,
Xenoblade series,
mm-hmm,
although I feel it with Xenoblade, like Xenosaga was literally just I'm trying to make perfect works and I want it to
yeah,
be 6 games, but it's actually going to be 3 games, but the 3 games are actually going to be only 2 parts of perfect works. And
hmm,
then Xenoblade, I feel like, while it definitely takes elements from Xenogears, I do feel like Takahashi, throughout the whole Xenoblade trilogy, was not trying to recreate Perfect Works. Obviously, there's still elements of
hmm.
Xenogears and Perfect Works in Xenoblade because it's like kind of just his, I guess you could say his quirks when it comes to writing.
Yeah,
But I do feel like he's not just trying to recreate it. But
yeah,
Xenoblade
that's
3
fair.
definitely made me, it definitely made me question it at times though, because they just kind of blatantly, shamelessly copied elements of
Mhm.
Xenogears in Xenoblade 3. Shamelessly in the best way possible, of course, but
It might
definitely
be
shamelessly.
it might be more accurate to say that there is a message that Takahashi has been trying to impart through his games. And it feels like we're finally getting to a point where it can really convey exactly what he wants to convey with like a game that actually feels finished.
Yeah, and it's ironic too because like the Xenoblade games, for all like the depth, they're actually pretty basic on like a like
Hmm.
in terms of like understanding the overall narrative compared to Xenogears and Xenosaga. Because Xenogears
They
and
definitely
Xenosaga are
are.
like they're so far up their own ass when it comes to like proper nouns and stuff and understanding just what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
Xenoblade is not hard to understand what's going on unless you want to get
Hmm.
into the whole metaphysics or whatever. And because of that, the Xenoblade games actually feel very short in comparison from a
Even though they're
narrative
not.
perspective. Yeah, like like they feel short because well,
Hmm.
one thing is that there's animated cutscenes. Like obviously, when you have text, you get through things faster. So if the game's longer, then but you get through the text faster. Even if it's like twice the story's twice as long, it in
Hmm.
terms of the actual time to get through it, it's not.
Yeah.
So like the Xenoblade games, I do feel like the stories are definitely shorter than Xenogears and Xenosaga,
Sure.
purely because of that. But I don't it's not a bad thing because they're able to get what they want. Like they're able to do what they want without forcing themselves into, I don't know, reaching a deadline,
Yeah.
Like
You know, I,
simplifying it works in this
yeah.
situation.
Yeah. I mean, like, really, the Xenoblade games are all about dealing with. I'll keep going to my Pog face, my avatar. Anyway, the Xenoblade games are all about taking really advanced philosophical ideas, which we see in Xenosaga and Xenogears, and trying to like recontextualize them and present them in a way that anybody can understand. And I think that's fucking great. And I feel like Xenoblade 3 is the game that's really starting to get into the nitty gritties of it, like the real big implications, um, while still expressing it in a relatively simple way through characters that are very grounded. Um, and
Yeah,
I'm just
yeah,
kind
like
of
the
rambling
story is
on.
undoubtedly so much simpler than Xenogears and Xenosaga, yet it's also just as, if not more complex thematically, just because I guess it's more focused
Mm,
and more understandable.
mm,
Because like obviously Xenosaga and Xenogears have political themes, but they don't hyper focus on like the very specific messaging that it wants to
yeah,
get across because of like the proper nouns and stuff.
yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I would love to have something just, completely crazy and incomprehensible like Xenogears again. I've seen people suggest doing like a Xenogears remake in the art style of that new Star Ocean remake. And if they were to do that and like actually like create disc 2 instead of just having it be like 90% narration, that game could definitely be some peak fiction and I would
Yeah.
love that. But, the Xenoblade series works and the types of stories they want to tell works. So I don't know. I just trust Takahashi at this point. He's earned my trust.
Yeah.
Let him do anything. Let him
He's
cook.
he's an auteur that has like very much more ambition like than he can contain. But I feel like, through what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plus, quote unquote failures, it feels like he's finally starting to get the hang of it. I know it depends
It's
what you
because
define as a failure, but that's a very harsh word to use. But
yeah,
all
I
these
mean,
games are flawed in different ways, and I feel like
yeah, like definitely,
it's starting
yeah,
to come
definitely
together.
reining in. I definitely feel like reining in the proper noun stuff definitely helped with that. But it
Mm,
also feels like he's at the point where he realizes he doesn't need to be that complex. He just needs to tell a story that he wants to tell and do it well.
yeah,
And that's what he's basically done with the Xenoblade series. Like he recognizes that as fun as it is to just be really complicated, if you can get across a poignant message without being overtly complicated, then you could just do it. And he just did it with Xenoblade 3.
yeah, and it probably resonates with a wider audience, which is awesome. It kind of blows my mind sometimes thinking about how this is a Nintendo series now. Like, this is
Bro,
alongside Mario and Yoshi and Pikachu.
you do not understand how many crying thumbnails I've seen for the Xenoblade series. There's this one just I don't know if it's like a newer account or whatever. I can't remember the name, but like every single not Xenoblade 1, but I think the final thumbnail for like the end of Xenoblade 1 was a crying thumbnail. And then Xenoblade 2, Chapter 1 was like whatever, Chapter 3 was whatever, and then Chapter 3 onward, I think like every chapter was a crying thumbnail.
Oh, you mean
And
like
then
the YouTubers reacting to the story?
well, no, no, no. Like a specific YouTuber, like their own playthrough. They like take clips throughout their playthrough of like all the important parts and all the reactions to all the important parts, like the boss
Right.
fights and the cutscenes and stuff. So like they had one for like basically each chapter in Xenoblade 2, and I think from like chapter 3 onward, like almost every single one of them was a crying thumbnail. And then chapter 3, I think all the thumbnails except chapter I don't remember. It was all but one or maybe all but two of the chapters in Xenoblade 3 where it was crying thumbnails, and I'm just thinking like, well, clearly they're doing something right because never have I seen so many crying thumbnails before for any series.
Yeah, yeah. Xenoblade, it definitely gets the emotions running, and like people will have their arguments about which story resonated with them the most, but easily for me, three, the
Yeah,
writing just resonated with me, and I really was brought to tears at certain points.
yeah, I would definitely agree. And like at that point, I was already convinced, like, man, they can't top this, can they? Because I already loved the previous two. I thought they were great
Hmm.
stories. And then Xenoblade 3, I'm just like, wait a second, how is this possible? He's cooking so hard.
I
The,
don't
the
even
kitchen's on fire.
I don't even think this is his final form. Is the crazy thing. I think we can still see like improvements, and well, sorry, I don't have a good segue.
It's just
um,
like I don't know where he goes from here. What does he do? Like he's already like destroyed capitalism. What does he destroy next?
well, maybe he'll destroy capitalism in more obvious ways. Who knows? But yeah, one thing I really want to talk about because it's kind of central to all of Takahashi's writing, and it's something a lot of people don't talk about, is the philosophy of Gnosticism. Um, do you have much insight into this side of it?
I've read some articles on like analyzing the Gnostic themes of Xenoblade, and I
Hmm.
would like to say that I understand it, but I don't understand any of it.
That's perfectly fine. So that's where I come in because I've done a lot of research into this stuff, and I find the whole philosophy of Gnosticism really fascinating. Basically, the idea is Gnosticism was an ancient, we'll call it a sect of Christianity, in like the early, um, a bit after Jesus Christ, like we're talking like 200 AD ish, around that period. Though it might have lasted like a wider span of time, but that's probably like where most of our information comes from, which we, unearthed like, maybe I think it was 50 years ago. We basically found some ancient scrolls and stuff that had all this information about a religion that had been lost to time, and that's Gnosticism. And basically, the idea is it's a bunch of people got together and were like, this is kind of before Christianity was an organized religion. You know, before like the Roman Catholic Church really started canonizing the Bible and all that. And you know, these early Christians were having philosophical debates about Christianity and the nature of God and all that stuff. And this might be me reading into it a little bit, but kind of like my idea of Gnosticism is it's basically about it encourages freedom of thought and discussion. Like it's a very anti-dogma. It's all about like, you know, creating your own sense of reality and your own definition of God. And so, but a common theme in Gnosticism that comes up is this idea that the world kind of sucks in this particular period of time, but also now. I think it's especially relevant. The world kind of sucks, and why is that if God created the world? And so Gnosticism puts forward this idea that, which was, you know, quite radical, and you know, this is kind of one of the origins of where the word heresy comes from. The idea that the God that like basically runs the world, whatever you interpret that to be, is malevolent. It is an evil entity that wants to see humans stuck in a perpetual cycle of suffering. And so the idea is, it's not that they are anti-God. They're not like Satanists, which is a whole other can of worms. But the whole idea is that they are believers of God. They just think that the God that rules the world is not the real God. The real God is like somewhere higher in a place we can't reach. And so the God that actually runs everything is a false God that is, you know, in control of everything. And I feel like this is a very interesting thing to think about, whether you approach it from a theological perspective, a philosophical perspective, or a materialist perspective, because you got to imagine this is basically just like, you know, an anti-authority message. It's about criticizing authority, criticizing the hegemony that exists in the world as the absolute truth, and instead being like, okay, maybe things are actually fucked up, and maybe we need to do something about that. There's different like sects of Gnosticism that we know about, and different ways that they approach this. You know, some of them are a bit more nihilistic in my reading, and just like, well, the world sucks. There's nothing we can do about it. But I really get this sense that most of it wasn't like that. You know, and like this whole idea that we are in a world run by a false god, a false world with false bodies, and what's really real, like, is the soul, the spirit. You know, something that is deeply personal. Like, it's all about finding, like, you know, real meaning in a world that's rife with falsehoods. And when I explain it all like this, I think you can see how that becomes relevant when we're talking about Xenoblade. Like, the whole Xenoblade series and all the Xeno games are all about this idea of the world is not as it seems. And it's about our protagonists who are at first naive, becoming aware of the true nature of the world and choosing to rise up and change things. Like, that's true in Xenoblade 1, 2, 3. Less so X, but there is some Gnosticism stuff in there. But yeah, like, it's just a running theme. And I feel like Xenoblade 3 is where it really starts to coalesce for me personally, where it's like, okay, very obvious from the start, this is a world in which people are trapped in a cycle of death and rebirth, of samsara, if we want to use like the Buddhist terminology. And the whole idea is that we need to escape this. We need to liberate ourselves from this false consciousness and realize that the world isn't as it seems, and that it isn't just about fighting to live and living to die, whatever the quote is. But yeah, it's actually about, you know, connecting with people, that, you know, there is more to life than just fighting. There's like leisure, there is love, there's art, there's all these things we can create instead of just destroying each other forever. And I think that's like the central thesis of Xenoblade 3. It really brings it all home. And like, we have a literal Gnostic figure, you know, the demiurge is what they call the false god, I should have said. We have like a literal demiurge figure in Mobius and Zed. And if you take that from a more like socio-political stance, we can see how that is analogous to like the capitalist hegemony. Like
The
it's
bourgeois.
literally the state. It's literally like, yeah,
Yeah, the bourgeois class,
yeah,
you know, the evil rich billionaires.
yeah, literally. Like, like you said, when we first saw console K, was it? I always get the names wrong. Um,
K is the one from chapter 2, yeah, the one
yeah,
who's trying to like use the Pharaonis to suck up the energy so you could steal it and then fight
yeah.
back against them, but he
Good
destroys
old
Pharaonis.
Special K. Yeah. So like when we like demask this person and we see like it's an old dude underneath, it's like the themes of the story immediately become apparent. And a small criticism of Xenoblade 3 is I feel like they didn't commit to that enough because a lot of the Mobius are really young, actually. But I'm still
I
gonna
think the
point to
main
this.
story, I think the main story ones are the ones that are like young, and also
Yeah,
like Irma from one of the side quests. But I think all the other ones are like adults.
yeah. I kind of wish they focused a bit more on that though. But like, yeah, just like console X is a young guy. Like that always found that weird. But yeah, like
Well, Console X is not like a person. Console X is like Y and Z, who they're just like concepts. They weren't based on real people before.
hmm. But yeah, anyway, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, like this whole idea of old people clinging to power feels very relevant in our current political climate. And I think this is a story as old as time. There's as long as like the days of like ancient empires has this kind of thing existed. It's all about old people that are clinging to their power, clinging to their lives, seeking immortality, seeking to preserve what they have, and not wanting to um, give anything up to the future. And it is,
Yeah,
yeah, it's exactly, it feels exactly what they're going for with this whole theming of
yeah.
making the
That was
Mobius.
kind of like what I mentioned before about how like most JRPGs kind of have this theme, but Xenoblade 3 is the one that commits to it the hardest. That you know that the creators actually mean what they say.
Mm-hmm.
And about the Gnosticism thing you were referencing earlier, so like I know
Yeah.
Xenogears and Xenosaga also have that, but
Yes,
like if you notice,
absolutely.
this didn't necessarily start with Xenoblade 3. It started with 1 and 2 as well. You have Zanza, you have
Yeah.
Amalthus, you have the Architect or whatever. You
Yeah.
know all these like false godlike figures,
Yeah.
but
I
it's
mean, there's
always
literally a
sort of a
character.
more
There's literally a character in Xenoblade 1 called Yaldabaoth, which is like the name of the demiurge in
that,
Gnosticism.
yeah,
So like,
that was the name of the mech. I'm pretty sure
yeah, that was
that was
Egil's
that was
mech.
Egil's, yeah, Egil's mech, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, very subtle use of terminology. I mean, Persona 5 also uses uh, that name as well. So,
Persona and Shin Megami Tensei are also very much on the Gnosticism juice. But yeah,
and
I
I'm
think
starting to
Zen.
feel like I think the Trail series is heading in that direction as well. Like ever since they introduced the Gnosis and the Crossbell games, and it feels like it's kind of.
Wait, there's
I feel like they're kind
Gnosis.
of
There's
copying
Gnosis in Trails now.
there. There's a lot of theories when it comes to like the Trail series in regards to like alternate universe stuff. It's very complicated. Nobody knows what's going on because it's a series very much in for the long run. We're probably like 15, 20 years away from the end,
God,
but
Trails is crazy.
it very well might be heading in the same sort of metaphysical sort of reality that Xenoblade operates in,
That's
all of
really
like the
cool.
multi-universe. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not I can't even say it's like a spoiler because it hasn't done that yet, but I feel like it might at some point.
Yeah, that's interesting. Anyway, this isn't a Trails podcast, but that's very interesting to know. Yeah, but yeah, I feel
But
like this is a thing. Like Gnosticism was huge for JRPGs. I feel like even Final Fantasy, I think, was probably the one to really like make it popular. But like even like the Shin Megami Tensei games were also doing it around a very similar time. So it kind of just I think in
and
this
Xenogears.
yeah, yeah. And Xenogears, which came immediately after Final Fantasy VII. Yeah, like there were
And
lots
the
of these JRPGs that kind of tapped into this Gnostic idea. But I think like it was just a cultural thing that was going around like the 90s. Like everyone was getting into it. The Matrix
I,
was a really big
I
one.
do I do
Evangelion.
feel I do feel it was Takahashi that in terms of like JRPGs that kind of coined it because remember Final Fantasy VII was supposed to be Xenogears until you know, they boned them. But
Yeah. I mean, who knows like how much like quote unquote cross pollination was happening at Square Enix at the time.
I
Um,
mean, there's definitely a lot of elements of Final Fantasy VII that are similar to Xenogears. I mean,
hmm.
Deus and Genova are like basically the same thing.
What Evangelion came out like within a year as well, didn't it?
Oh yeah, I am fully convinced that Takahashi was inspired by Evangelion. There's
Yeah.
no question.
There was a lot
Like, I
going on
mean,
there.
the Ouroboros forms just straight up look like Ava's.
Yeah, yeah, they do. Yeah, I think like
But
Takashi was very influenced by popular anime of the time, but I know we can look at like Evangelion and Ghost in the Shell, and they both go back to the Matrix. That was like kind of the really big one that started spreading the idea of Gnosticism to, media, and it kind of was really popularized around the late '90s. With games like this, but I feel like the Xeno series is the one that really gets it, like really gets into the nitty gritties of Gnosticism in a way that none of these others do, and I think Xenoblade 3 is like the perfect apotheosis of that kind of
yeah,
mission
because the
statement.
thing about because like in the previous games, it's always sort of like a religious figure, and even in Feature Redeemed, it kind of is with like
Hmm.
Alpha. And while there's obviously a religious component to everything in the Xenoblade series, when it comes to Mobius, I feel like they're probably the first time where they're an explicit non-religious. I mean, they are religious, but they're also non-religious. Like
They
I said,
didn't. They
they're the
didn't
bourgeois.
rely on the religious symbolism this time. That's a good point, actually. That's a very good point.
Yeah, yeah, because like you have Zanza, he's like a false god. You have a Malthus, he's trying to act in the name of God. You have, you have the Xenosaga stuff, the Xenogear stuff,
Hmm.
and it's like Mobius, while being godlike in nature, they're more specific. They're less of like the, I guess you could say, like criticism of like the church or whatever. It's more just they're just the bourgeois, but
Yeah.
they occupy the same sort of space as the demiurge, as you mentioned
Yeah.
before.
That's
They occupy the
exactly
same
it.
space, but in a
Like,
different
like,
angle.
like you think about it, like the historical context, like the rise of the Roman Catholic Church, like that was the hegemony back then. That was the bourgeoisie. Like, that's the context in which Gnosticism was operating. They were critical of the church, not because of were critical of religion necessarily. They were critical of the state. Like, I think that's really important. Like, state
Yeah, and
religion
Xenoblade
is what they
for
had a
all
problem with.
for all of the Xeno series of criticisms of religion, which there are many, I've never gotten the impression that the Xeno series is anti-religion
No,
ever.
absolutely not. Even though,
Like
like, we
you
have
even
like
have
the whole idea in Xenoblade One that we want a world without gods. I think people can very easily misconstrue that as being anti-religious, but I don't think it is. I think it's more like a pro-human message than anything.
yeah, it's like we have our own autonomy, even if there is a higher power, they don't control us.
Yes, exactly,
And
exactly.
the funny thing about that is like in Xenoblade 2, Rex basically thanks God for making humanity exist. Remember? He thanks the architect. I'm just like,
That's right.
is
Yeah.
just imagine someone thanking God and not being a religious nut job. Like,
It's a wild concept. No,
trust
but
me,
seriously.
I live in Florida. It's a wild concept.
Yeah, you deal with the real brunt of religious conservatives in that part of the world. God.
Bro,
Yeah.
Florida is literally becoming a Nazi state. This isn't even like an exaggeration at this point.
Yeah, and that kind of like really makes a story like Xenoblade relevant in the current era. But yeah, it's
But
that's exactly the thing. It's not about religion necessarily. It's about how the state manipulates religion to control people. That's what Gnosticism is like fighting against.
But yeah, actually, speaking of the politics of Florida, something that I find interesting about Xenoblade 3 specifically is how it, like, obviously it's a criticism of capitalism. It's also criticism of the conservative mindset, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah.
Because the thing is like, so a lot of people don't understand like what certain political terms mean. A lot of people will conflate conservatism with like fascism, which is
Mm,
funny because technically liberals are the real conservatives and the conservatives are fascists. It's just that the Overton
kinda.
window is
Yeah,
so
yeah,
skewed to the right.
yeah.
But um, okay, hold on. Um, okay, I lost my train of thought there. Just give me a second. I've been talking for so
You're
long.
good. You're good. You're good. We're talking about like
Okay, so
conservatism
yeah, so what I
and
was saying is that so basically the idea to me is that conservatism as an ideology is a gateway or a pipeline to fascism.
yeah.
Because think about it, what is Mobius? Mobius is a fear of change, right? They don't
Hmm.
want to move forward into the future, or another way to put it is
Yeah.
it's the idea of like capitalist realism. There's no world outside
Yeah.
of capitalism, right?
Yeah.
So because they're so like they're sticking to their conservative ways, they're making sure that nothing ever changes. The thing is, I believe this is that I believe that like humanity in general has like a natural instinct to grow, evolve, become better,
Hmm.
and conservatism kind of gets in the way of that. And the
Yeah.
only way to maintain conservatism as like a construct, as an ideology, is fascism, because
Yeah.
people
Power. force.
like demand people demand to grow, to change, to make the world better,
Hmm.
and the only way that you can maintain a society that doesn't grow is to regress it so far that it can't grow, which is basically like
Yeah,
what a fascist society is, where
yeah,
people's freedoms are so restricted they can't dream of a better world, they can't do anything to make the world better. They're basically just being puppets controlled for all their lives.
yeah,
So that's how I kind of contextualize, like it's anti-capitalist, but it's also anti-conservative in
yeah,
like an ideological way, not just in like a political way, but also like the idea like you can't be stuck in the present. You can't be stuck with the status quo, because if you keep the status quo as it is, things will get worse to maintain it, because you can only maintain the status quo through just oppression. It's
yeah,
the only way.
yeah. There's so much I want to say to that, and I don't know where to start. But yeah, like you've hit the nail on the head there. Um, like this whole idea of Kavessians, is that what they call it? The Kavessi and the
Kavesi.
Agnians.
Yeah.
How they are afraid of change. Like war is like it's not great, but it's what they know. It's the status quo, and it keeps them alive. It keeps them safe. As long as they fight, then they get their life force, their flame clocks fed, and they also like get like literal like benefits like from the consoles. Like they'll come and give them better food, better bathhouses and stuff like that
But
if they fight
it's
well.
also why it works as a criticism, not just of capitalism, conservatism, but also fascism, because like you can't really blame Kevis and Agnes for being that way, because that's all they know, that's all they're ever taught. Because when a
Mm,
society becomes fascist, like one of the core tenets of fascism is the rejection of truth and knowledge and
yeah,
understanding and all that
exactly.
stuff. So they keep all information about the world to the bare minimum. The only thing they're taught is what benefits themselves, which is the endless war, because they suck
Yeah,
up all their energy and stuff.
yeah, 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 you're absolutely right. But yeah, it's like I feel like Xenoblade 3 does a really interesting thing here where it doesn't just purely, say fascism is evil and end it there. It also explores the way that ordinary people are part of fascism and how we create fascism through our daily lives. Like the whole idea of like being afraid of change, being afraid of the status quo being interrupted is emblematic of us, our fear of sacrifice, our fear of like changing the way we live to oppose the status quo is how fascism is reinforced. It's something many of us are guilty of, even me. And that's something we constantly need to reflect on if we want to make the world a better place, is to reflect on the ways that we are, through action or inaction, enabling fascism. Fascism isn't just something that exists far away and controls everything, which, to an extent, at the highest levels it is, but it is also something which we allow to exist. And that's a huge theme of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Zed is the creation of humanity. Mobius is we made Mobius. It's not something that came and invaded, Alrest or whatever. It's something that was incarnated through human fear of the future, fear of like losing what we have. That's exactly how the endless now was created. And what a good term
Yeah,
endless now is. I love that noun.
yeah, and that whole thing actually kind of confused me at first, because I was thinking, okay, what specifically are they fearful of? Because think about it, there's the world of Xenoblade 1, the world of Xenoblade 2. They're supposed to be like copied into Origin and then recreated and combined in a way
Hmm.
that allows them to not like annihilate each other, right? So I'm
Yeah.
thinking, okay, so what is the thing they're fearful of? My first thought was like, well, if I knew that I was going to become a part of a Swamp Man experiment, I'd be kind of scared shitless, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is that they kind of already are in Ionios, because they're reincarnating repeatedly. So they're kind
Yeah.
of already doing the whole Swamp Man thing. So that theory doesn't really make sense, because if they were fearful of the Swamp Man thing, then why would they do the Swamp Man thing for all of eternity?
Hmm.
But this is kind of ties in with Future Redeemed as well. And my thought was, okay, well, the people of the Xenoblade 1 world and the people of the Xenoblade 2 world do not know each other, because they've never came into contact with each other.
Hmm.
And what if it's like a sort of like an immigration sort of thing, where it's like
Hmm.
you're going to see all these people you don't know of, that don't have the same cultures as you, that are different from you, and that's what I'm thinking. Like, what if that is the fear of change that is being described? I mean, obviously, thematically it's just like the fear of, like I said before, capitalist it's capitalist realism, the fear like there is no better world. But
Yeah.
in terms of like the actual context of the plot, I think there's also sort of an immigration angle going on, and I feel
Hmm.
like Future Redeemed kind of validates that point. Because remember in Future
Yeah.
Redeemed how the city people, they're like bringing in refugees from the war, and there's
Yeah.
this whole conflict between Niall and Matthew about like, oh well, we can't bring these people in, they're butchers, they're violent or
Yeah.
whatever, and
Yeah.
they're gonna kill us or whatever.
Yeah.
And Matthew is like, no, we got to save them, they're
Mm.
it's war torn, this sort of war torn sort of situation they're in is like, it's not their fault, it's the people above them that sort of forced this to happen. And
Yeah.
like, so, well,
God.
I feel like one of the
So much
main
good.
themes of Xenoblade 3 is definitely the anti-capitalist angle. I feel like there's also a very much pro-immigration angle to it, and I
Hmm.
feel like that's justified by a multitude of things. One is the name Xeno. Xeno literally just means like other. It's like
Yeah.
the whole Xeno series has always been about like accepting of the other, of things that are unknown to you, and sort of accepting it as like
Xenoblade
a part
X
of
really
reality,
goes into
something
the
you
immigration
can.
themes a lot as well. Like that's huge in that game.
But I think another thing is that you have to sort of take it in a sort of Japanese context. Like, obviously, the issues in
Yes.
Xenoblade 3 don't just apply to Japan, they apply to the world. Capitalism's everywhere.
Yeah.
But they especially apply to Japan when you consider the sort of like pressing issues of Japan, because there's obviously an issue in Japan where there's racist people there
Yeah.
who don't like immigration, and they don't want immigration, and that's
Japan
causing
is yeah.
issues because
Japan has
they have.
massive issues of xenophobia.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking like, so it makes sense that a creator would want to write a story about why we should accept these people,
Mm.
because like, and like I said, also applies to other places. Like, for example, we know that there's like wars all around the world. Like in the Middle East, there's wars, and there's always these refugees coming in, and there's so much xenophobia in the regions that they exile to,
Yeah.
and that's actually the exact thought that came in my head during that scene in Future Redeemed, where I'm just like, these are just like Middle Easterners, like in terms of like an analogy, like these
Well, like
people are
the
basically just.
Ukraine war, like, like we got a war going on right now.
Well, yeah, I was thinking more the because in terms of like, well, I guess there are refugees, but there's less of a sort of hesitance towards Ukrainian refugees because let's be real, they're white.
That is, yeah, that's a fact. All right, go on. Continue with your point.
Oh no, that was basically it. So like, yeah, like if you take like the Japanese political context and also like combine it with the themes that we already like kind of know of, I feel like it just kind of like meshes with the whole series
Yeah,
themes. Like it's a anti-capitalist. It's very much pro-immigration as well. I feel like it's
yeah.
like a big thing.
It's very like, yeah, like it's really like a story about how like I think Niall was a great character because she represents like how ordinary people with purely good intentions can become, forces for destruction, forces for chaos. Well, not chaos. What's the word? Yeah, forces for oppression. I will say, in that she becomes kind of xenophobic because of her trauma, like losing her children that she loved. Well, not her children, but the kids that she loved. Um, to people from was it Agnes or Kevis? I can't remember. But either way, like she's just become like so like fearful of others that she closes off from the idea of accepting everybody. And like
Yeah, like a
it's
lot of characters are like
obviously
that in the series.
you understand why she feels that way because she was horribly mistreated and like that was a horrible thing that happened. But then Xenoblade is all about like really coming to terms with that hard question of yes, your pain is valid, but you can't use that to justify xenophobia because everyone's got their circumstances and everyone, is in different ways a victim of the hegemony. Like
Yeah,
we're
like
both culprits and victims at the same
even
time.
if you understand where someone's coming from, you're still responsible for your own actions. That's what I've
Yeah.
always believed because I see a lot of people doing like being just abusive piles of garbage online, and it's just like, oh well, my life is terrible because I'm of this minority group and I've dealt with all this, and it's just like, yeah, I feel for you, but
Mm.
also like you should still be nice to people. You should still be
Yeah.
accepting. You should still try
Yeah.
to understand that other people are going what you're going through, and you shouldn't use that as an excuse to like be an asshole.
Gosh, it's just like what we were talking about like the other day about you know, transphobic trans people, like people that trans people that seem to exclude other trans people based on arbitrary criteria because of the trauma they've experienced. Like there's so many stories of that of like it's kind of like, you know, turning to the dark side. It's like this idea that instead of like using your trauma to enhance your capacity for empathy and you wanting to create a better world where it doesn't happen to someone else, you languish in that trauma and kind of let yourself be defined by it, and only you can only perpetuate harm. And that's like a tough question to grapple with, because I see this all the time, and there's like so many valid reasons to be angry at the world and angry at people, but we need to make sure that we don't let that hate control us. Like, it needs to come from a place of empathy and love first and foremost, and that's something that you know, Noah has that N doesn't. It's that sort of like
Yeah.
idea that he's able to understand the value of community and empathy over just selfish love, which is kind of what
Yeah,
N's all about.
I I feel like Takahashi's like nuanced understanding of these tough questions is so good because like there's multiple characters in Xenoblade 3 who are
Mm.
basically like that. You have N, you have Shania,
Shania,
you have
God.
Irma, you have who else? There's someone else I'm pretty sure.
Shania is
Zoran.
literally like that capitalist realism, I feel like she just can't. She's emblematic of those people that can't accept revolution because they're afraid. You know, they and they don't believe in humanity, and so they only want to look out for themselves. It's such a powerful thing to include in the story, like, because she really is like one of the most empathetic characters, even though she does the most horrible things. It's just, it's
And
good. It's really good.
this actually gets into a point I want to get into, which is so a complaint a lot of people had about the game is that Mobius are a bunch of Saturday morning
Yeah,
cartoon
let's get
villains.
into that.
And my thought of that is this is probably like the most like complete lack of understanding of what the story's trying to tell you,
Yeah.
because Takahashi even said in like an interview before the game came out that like while he made like his past characters more like sympathetic or whatever, he wanted to show more like negative sort of feelings like greed and whatever,
Mm.
which
Mm.
obviously Mobius represents. Like all the Mobius, well, not all the Mobius, but most of the Mobius are just evil for the sake of being evil, because as much as I believe in humanity, there are definitely always going to be some people who will want to make things worse for everyone.
Yeah.
And the idea that like, oh, they're not sympathetic enough. Malos and Jin, I felt so much for them. I felt so much for Egil, and I'm just like, but those characters worked for the stories that they were in, you know?
Mm. Mm.
Like, you feel for Egil because of, like, the sort of conflict of Xenoblade 1. You feel for Malice and Jin because, like, the whole thing about, Xenoblade 2 is, like, the clashing of hope and despair, you know? Like,
Yeah.
some people just the better world isn't possible, humans are evil, so we might as well just give up on it, and then Rex is, like, the counterbalance of hope where he's like,
Yeah.
"No, humans are still good," and stuff. So, like, these villains work for the games that they're in, but
Mm.
Xenoblade 3 is a different game with different characters and different
Yeah.
themes, and even if there are shared elements, it has its own plans, and
Yeah.
it
And I feel like,
necessitates that there's you know, super evil Saturday morning cartoon villains, and it's not like these people don't exist in the real world. I
mm-hmm.
mean, if have we has any like if you've been watching Elon Musk for the past year, he's
Mm-hmm.
Mobius. He's
Yeah.
Mobius, like
Yeah.
to a T,
100%.
comically so. Because
Yeah.
the Mobius people, they're evil, but they're also complete morons. They're really, 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 really like pathetic,
Yeah.
whiny little babies. Like
Yeah.
there was one
Yeah.
Mobius where I'm just like, why does this dude sound like British Jordan Peterson?
That's good. Like, was that Mobius Y? Maybe?
No, 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 not Mobius Y. It was the one from Tyon's Ascension quest, or what do you call it? The side story for Tyon.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
one where they invade the colony that Nimue is hiding
Yeah,
out
yeah,
in.
yep, yep, yep.
Uh, yeah, that dude had such a funny voice, and like these people they're actual clowns, right?
Yeah.
And it's because people think that like, oh, these villains are always these like like very like aware, very like intelligent masterminds. Like no,
Mm.
they just have power, they have influence, and they
Yeah.
use it for bad. People like
Yeah.
that exist, and like it's not like it's just that we have the counterbalances in terms of like, you know, like the Shania and the people like you can understand their circumstances, and it shows both sides to get you to sort of understand the situation, where we'll have like the super evil people, the people who cave in because there's no better way out, and then the people
Hmm.
who fight the system to, you
Yeah.
know, make sure that we don't have any more Shanias, we don't have any more ends.
Yeah.
We want, you know, Noahs and Mios to liberate society or whatever, you know?
Yeah. God. Yeah. Everything you said, I 100% agree with. And just that feeling, like, the game really empowers you to, like, get in with this idea too. Like, I was just thinking, the whole idea of like how they smash the flame clocks is like such a visceral way of showing like liberating people from the false consciousness of like the capitalist hegemon. Like
It's also cool as hell.
it's cool as hell. Like, yeah, this is the revolution, baby. Like they're literally like breaking people's shackles and teaching them that they don't have to fear. Like there is life beyond war. And the whole thing is like, the main story is about liberating colonies and the getting to fight Mobius, but the side stories are about what comes after. It's about this whole idea of, okay, now that we've liberated people, what do we do now? And the honest truth is, most colonies struggle at first. They're very afraid. They don't know what to expect from a life without war. And these quests are about teaching them stuff like agriculture, art, culture, love, even sex. Like that comes up. Like, yeah, these characters don't know about sex because like war is all they know, and like there's
Oh,
so much.
socialism.
Yeah, and like, but yeah, like literally, like this whole like, I feel like the affinity chart was perfectly implemented in this game because it really hammers in these themes perfectly. Communism and all this stuff. This is not just about smashing and destroying society, it's also about rebuilding it. And that's exactly what we're doing in the side quests. We're teaching people the skills to survive, like independently, but not just independently of the system, but working together instead of against each other. Like the Agnians and the Kavesi have like such a profound distrust of each other because that's all they've known their entire lives. But our side quests, our main characters are all about showing these people that the other side are nothing to be afraid of. They're just like you. They are exactly the same. They're exactly the same victims of the cycle of violence, and it's not like you can just erase all the trauma. Like there are many side quests that go into the nuances of that, about how like you killed my friends. How do I deal with that? And some people deal with it better than others. There's even stories about people who become lovers from like people from the other side of the war, and I think that's really like that's kind of
That was nice.
amazing. Yeah, there's a couple of those. And yeah, but you literally see the world changing with every side quest you do. Sorry, just playing some really ominous music, so I'm going to change that. um, but yeah, like the world gets better. You see the colonies, like people, like you hear the chatter. There's a mechanic in this game where you walk through colonies and you just see like little text bubbles pop up of like what people are talking about. And the talk will always go from like, oh, what do we do? We've just been liberated. I'm so scared. I'm so angry. This is so different. And the more side quests you do, the more those text bubbles start filling up with things like, hey, things are looking up. Things are starting to get better. We've got a good supply of food and water. We're making good contact with these other colonies. And you look at the affinity chart, and you see those lines start to form between the colonies. They go from enemies to cautious to allies to friends, and like eventually, if you do every side quest, all those lines line up, and they're all green, and everyone is friends. And like that is such a good way of using the gameplay to communicate the feeling of like you're basically just building communism. You're building a new
No,
world
no.
from the ruins of the old.
Unironically, the game mechanics for the side quest is literally just socialism slash communism. Like it's
Yeah,
literally just the implementation of such, because it's not just that Colony Iota has like there's that one NPC that says the Karl Marx quote, like to each according to his ability, each according to his need. It's not
yeah,
just that someone in Colony Iota mentioned the concept of mutual aid
yeah,
by like the actual word mutual aid,
yeah.
but
That
the
comes up
fact
a
that
couple of times
elements
actually.
these
I think they say
elements
it. They,
are
they say it in Future Redeemed as well. Mutual aid.
I might have forgotten. I can't remember every single word, but like
Go for it.
it's
Sorry.
ingrained into the gameplay. So like the whole collectopedia in this game
Yeah,
is just the Karl Marx quote in action. It's
yeah,
literally people being like, I need these materials and you have the power to get them for me. So if you can give me the materials that I need, I can give you a reward that you'll need to fight Mobius. And it's
yeah,
like this sort of shared resource thing where it's like
yeah.
people are just helping each other because that's what people need to do.
Yeah,
Some people are good at something, some people are good at other things, some people need certain things, some people need other
yeah,
things, and it's just ingrained into the gameplay.
yeah. It's so good. I just felt so good doing all the side quests. I like, it made me rethink how side quests exists in video game in the first place. Like, we can go back to like old RPGs where it's like you're an adventurer, you get like an endorphin rush out of helping people, and it is very socialist at the end of the day. But I feel like Xenoblade is the first one to really like that I've played, the first game that's really tapped into that idea and re-examined it from like a very like socialist communist perspective. Just this idea that yeah, it is about helping each other with the abilities that we have, and we may be the heroes of this story because we are the Ouroboros. We have been literally given the power to fight Mobius, but we're not the only ones working to make the world better. Everyone is working together. Everyone in every colony we liberate is helping support us. We are gathering heroes from all across the world who support us in our battles. We are getting supplies from the colonies. We are, and like even in like the final battle, like you
I
see
was about to say the
cutaways to
final
every
battle.
colony is like joining the fight against Mobius. Everybody's
That's
fighting.
what
It's
that's
not
why I
just us.
find the final battle so cool, where they start bringing in all the heroes. Like even though it doesn't really make sense
Yes.
from a narrative standpoint, like how did they get here, or whatever. It's also like, but it's also like really cool. It's like, man, the friends these are the Xenoblade Chronicles. The friends we made along the way is the key to beating capitalism.
But it's true. Like it's literally those connections literally save the world. Like it's just such a good way of telling a
Yeah,
story
this is
for a
what I was
video
talking
game.
about. Yeah, this is what I was talking about earlier about how like the power of friendship, like you can't just have the power of friendship, you have to contextualize it in a way that so it doesn't feel like you're just copying everything else.
Yeah.
This is how they do it.
And like I've even talked about how the choice to like there's not really a Monado or like any sort of like crazy overpowered item that just makes the protagonists the powerful ones. There is the Ouroboros, but like I feel like that's less of a big deal as we make it. I feel like that's more of a symbolic thing. Because I'm going to be honest, like we could have beat this game without even having the Ouroboros power. Like you don't need
Every scene where they use the Ouroboros, they were getting their ass whooped. The only reason they have these forms
it.
is because it looks cool. Let's be real.
Yeah, yeah. And what really
Takahashi
the only
he
thing that
finished his rewatch. He finished his rewatch of Evangelion, was just like, man, I need that in my game.
but yeah, like it doesn't matter. Like the Ouroboros isn't really what makes a hero. It's just kind of like it's passing a torch. And like this is something that has been built up for generations. The liberators and the city, they've been the lost numbers. Sorry, they've been fighting for this for so long. And like the current party are just the latest in a long line of fighters for freedom fighters that have been like continuing this battle for centuries. And that's just such a cool feeling. And also like the idea that the only thing that makes them special, like really special, is Lucky Seven. And what's that? It's just a fucking sword. like I don't know, maybe it's got like some souls in it. Like that's kind of been like explained in Future Redeemed. But at the end of the day, it's just kind of like this Nopon just gives you a sword that he made from
Well,
some metal.
I
Like it's
it
just
is
like
it is basically a Monado, because if we remember like you know how in Future Redeemed N had the purple glow, and it's implied that he kind of has like the Malos core crystal, and then Matthew had the Emerald core crystal, and then we're just
okay,
like,
yeah.
oh,
Well
so
that's
that's the power of Lucky Seven that Noah's using throughout the game. That's why he's able to
that's
cut down the flame
yeah.
clocks.
It kind
It's
of.
the Aegis power cutting down the flame clocks, because the Aegises are basically Monados, right? So Lucky Seven's basically a Monado
I
when you
kind
think
of
about it.
liked it better when we didn't know that, because I really like the idea of this just being an ordinary sword made of origin metal, and that's it. Like it's just a sword, and that's what they use to fight with. Because yeah, I just like this idea, and maybe it's a little bit more interpretive than based in
Well,
reality, but I just like this idea of this ordinary people fighting against the machine. Like it's not just because they have a super cool weapon that can kill everything. It's just the efforts of everyone that went into it. And I guess that's still true because it is like they are carrying on the efforts of like thousands and
well,
thousands of people
they're
throughout history.
passing it on. Remember Xenoblade 2, where like where
Yeah,
Jin's
yeah.
like, when no one's around to support you, what then? Even if you want to, like, people are still bad, they'll mess it up. And he's like, well, if I can't be around to carry on the torch of like solving all the world's problems, I'll just pass it on to someone else. That's why I thought it was so sick in Future Redeemed at the end of the game, where like they decide to give their lives, Shulk and Rex, they give their lives to their children, and
Yeah.
like at that moment, I knew exactly what they were gonna say because like the game carries over the themes of the previous game so well that I just knew it when Glimmer asked like, what are we gonna do when we pass away?
Yeah.
And Rex is just like, pass it on. And I like popped out of my chair. I was like, yeah, tell us. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that was like a huge theme of Future Redeemed too. They really hammered that in. But yeah,
but
it's
I
good.
think that also kind of goes because I remember, like I told you, I did read some stuff about the Gnosticism and the Xenoblade series, but the whole idea of
Mm,
like the Monado is that it's some like has like Gnostic powers, or whatever, and it like
yeah.
has powers over like the
The
form of the
monad
world or
is
some
literally the
stuff.
name of the true God, by the way. Like it's like, well, their concept of God. It's a little bit different from the Christian God, but basically, yeah, it's just like the universal force, like the
Yeah, so like
monad.
the idea is that like the Monado is like the like the truth of the world, so it can like
Yeah,
rend reality basically,
yeah,
and
basically.
that's also that's basically why like the Aegis swords. That's why the Monado and Xenoblade One had the powers they do, and that's
Mm,
basically also why Lucky Seven is what it is because it's basically just the Numa core crystal combined with the souls of some characters from the previous games,
mm,
and that's also why A is able to destroy the flame clocks as well because A is a Monado.
mm,
That
mm.
I pieced that together. I was just like, "Oh, it makes sense now because if N has a Monado because he has the Numa core crystal, and then A is, you know, a part of Ontos who has a Monado, like the Monado is what destroys the flame clocks."
Yeah, yeah. It makes sense. But yeah, at the end of the day, that's just like, it's just it's symbolic, like, because the whole idea, like you said, like the monado is like the symbol of truth. Like it's about like, using truth to rend falsehoods away. That's kind of like the whole symbolism of the monado, and that carries through really well here too, because literally we're using that same power, the power of truth, or gnosis, if you will, to destroy the false world of Mobius. Like it's really cool thematically when you break it all
Yeah, like
down.
yeah, like in Xenoblade 1, how they're like trying to like fight against the future. There's nothing true about a future decided for you.
Mm,
People decide their own fates. And then in
mm,
Xenoblade 3, there's nothing true about a society that's in a forever war. No,
yep,
people coming together to, solve problems and make the world better. That's true. The most
yes,
true thing about humanity is that people are inherently good and
yes,
that it's their circumstances that make them bad. I actually do believe
yes.
that.
I
I don't
agree.
believe that like there's like a niche group because if it, technically if it was true that like nobody ever became bad like naturally, then we'd have no bad people ever. But like 99.9% of people, they become bad because of the circumstances. Like that's
Yeah.
just how it is.
I feel like most evil in the world is a product of living in a communist society. Sorry, capitalist, not communist. Oh my god, a capitalist society. What am I saying? This is
Oh
my
sure,
right wing
comrade.
arc. I'm actually alt right now. No, yeah, it's literally like we are born in this society which teaches us from a very young age that it's, kill or be killed. Like, not literally, but like, because we're not literally soldiers, but figuratively, like, it's the idea of we're competing for resources. Resources aren't meant to be evenly distributed. There is a scarcity, which is also wrong, by the way. That's a falsehood. There's a scarcity of resources that we need to fight for, and only some people can be happy. Others must suffer for some to be happy, and that's just fucking. That's basically how fascism works, and the whole like system we live in. And it doesn't have to be that way. Food shortages, global hunger is engineered. We have more than enough food to feed the whole world. We have more than enough housing to house everyone. We don't do that because profit motive gets in the way. Like that's basically the heart of it all. And like Xenoblade 3 isn't directly talking about money, but it's using this metaphor of like eternal war to basically amplify. Amplify, is that a
Yeah,
word?
their life energy is the surplus value of labor that's being extracted so that
Yeah,
Mobius can live forever.
yeah. That's their labor. Their labor is that they are fighting, and they're keeping things from changing because yeah, that's how the system sustains itself.
But I
And
think this actually kind of
yeah,
gets into like how shallow like the bourgeois actually is. And I think this actually really like because if you think about like real world like billionaires, whatever, like what end are they doing this? Because when you really think about it, once you hit a certain amount of money, no amount of money above that will make your life meaningfully better in any way.
Mm.
So basically, what they are fighting over is the sugar high of the immediacy of seeing a line go up, which is
Yeah, it's
really
literally it.
pathetic, really shallow. And then when you think about Mobius, like how pathetic and shallow these people are, it's just like, haha, these people are going to war and they're fighting and killing each other. Isn't that funny? And like, remember the scene with like the chessboard and
Yeah, yeah.
the colonies are represented by the chess pieces.
They are watching in
And
a theater. Like it's very
it, that's
clear.
like the show, yeah. And the thing, what I find so interesting is that because you would think that like, oh, if they have all this money, all this power, you would think they'd be basically living like the dream, like their lives are amazing or whatever. These
Mm.
people are shallow, pathetic, sad, miserable piles of
Yeah.
garbage. And this
No,
is
just
expressed
look at
very,
Elon.
yeah, he's a complete disaster of a person. It's funny but also sad.
Yeah.
But this is fully represented. This is why I thought this was like a really neat touch in the final boss with Zed, where they start like questioning his like ideology or whatever, and he just starts getting more and more mad as he's losing. And then
Yeah,
he's just
yeah.
like, I hate this world, I hate this world, I hate it, I loathe it so much. And it's just like,
Yep.
yeah,
That's
no
his true
shit.
colors. That's his true colors. Like he
He-
puts on the facade of like a true mastermind that's controlling everything very willfully and like has a grand design, but it's not. It's very
but he's
shallow
just
when
a
you take away
miserable
the
he's a miserable, hateful person. Because
yeah.
like I feel like a lot of these people aren't ideologically committed to whatever sort of bigotry they, ingrain in people to divide them. It's just a means to an end. I
Yeah.
feel like they have a sort of general hatred of humanity
Mm.
that just permeates, and the best way to like capitalize on that is just through bigotry. I feel
Yeah.
like obviously there's some people that over time they go so hard on the bigotry they eventually start to believe it, but I do feel like a lot of them it's they don't even believe in whatever transphobia, racism, which is obviously like nonsense when you think about it logically. I don't even
Mm.
think they necessarily all believe it, but it works to their benefit to proliferate it because they hate everyone,
Yeah,
because
they
they're
hate.
misanthropic, pathetic people.
Yep. And I think it was also an intentional decision on, the team's part to make Zed not a person. He is a concept. He is fascism. He is the embodiment of this pathetic sort of life that, many people, many of these billionaires can fall into, sure. But like it's not something to be empathized with. And that's why he made it
Yeah,
a concept. Like it's or
yeah, and
they.
yeah, and this is also like how I mentioned, like I think it's an intrinsic part of humanity to grow, to prosper, to want to make things better for people.
Mm,
So it makes sense that he's inhuman because there's nothing more inhuman than just raw hatred and control over everyone else. There's nothing
yeah.
more inhuman than that.
And it's something, they make a very clear point, especially with N and M, like it's something we can all fall victim to. N is great because it shows that even Noah is susceptible to the influence of these forces. If he becomes desperate enough, if he becomes so like attached to, his material desires, this being M, that he's willing to forego all of his values, all of his connections, and just,
But
continue to persist in the now, then
remember that
that's how he becomes part of the system. It starts perpetuating fascism.
there was that fork in the road. He could have chosen the
Yeah.
left path, he chose the right wing path.
He literally took the right wing path, the fucking, what would you call that? The blue, I don't know, fucking red pill, blue pill, whatever the fuck you call it. I don't even know anymore.
The colors are different by country. I hate it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like
Anyway,
blue is right wing, red is left wing in some countries, and it's the opposite here. I don't
yeah,
understand. I hate
it's bullshit. And when we're looking at Matrix, that was actually like, red pill is literally like Gnosticism. It's like, awakening from false consciousness of the hegemon. Like, how is that right wing? Oh my god. But that's basically the whole point of fascism, is they deliver a certain kind of reality, a certain view of what is the problem. And the problem is always like, the Jews, the blacks, the gays. And that is perfectly like personified in Xenoblade 3 with how, these people are taught that the Agnians or the Kavesi are the cause of all their problems, and to just
the
fight them.
existential crisis that they must defeat to save the world. It's a false
Yeah.
narrative. Yeah.
Yeah. And so realizing when Guernica comes in that these aren't your real enemy, Oh, okay. So this is a story about truth overcoming falsehoods, and oh my god, so good.
You know what's another point I wanted to bring up? I wanted to bring up the whole breeding thing.
Hmm. Okay, yeah,
So
go on.
I've seen a few people. I don't know if this is like. I don't think this is the majority opinion, but some people be like, Xenoblade 3 is about the meaning of life, and the meaning of life is to make babies.
Oh no.
Shinzo Abe from his grave looking over,
Fucking Shinzo Abe.
applauding Takahashi. No, so so um, I think that the whole like procreation thing actually heavily like bolsters the narrative themes of Xenoblade 3
Hmm.
because the thing is the birth rate issue in Japan is very much a real issue. Now they will blame everything besides what's actually the cause. They'll blame the immigrants. They'll blame the gay. Well, the blaming immigrants is weird because like the immigrants, they need the immigrants because of the birth rate crisis. But like they'll blame everything but the real cause, which is capitalism, of course, which the game's criticizing. So
Yeah.
I think the whole like birth aspect actually bolsters the whole like anti-capitalist narrative the game is going with
Hmm.
because it's a real issue that if you are poor, if you are working 16 hours a day in a black company, which is what they call it in Japan, where you're overworked like crazy,
Yeah.
you do not have time to form relationships,
Yeah.
let alone romance or sexual relationships. It's
Yeah.
not possible. They don't have the means to sustain themselves. They don't have the means to sustain just themselves. How are they going to sustain a baby? Like you have to like
Hmm.
be committed to taking care of a kid because babies don't have autonomy. Their brains barely work. You have to raise them, right?
Yeah.
And they don't have the means to do that. And I think that it's kind of driving home that point that this is an option that's been robbed of the people of Kevis and Agnes because they've never been told that this is a thing. You know, they're reincarnating repeatedly. So it's not an option, it's not a choice they have because of Mobius, because of capitalism, because Mobius is capitalism, right? It's a choice they're being
Hmm.
denied, and they're introduced to this like this is a choice, and it kind of brings the main theme of Xenoblade 3, or one of them, because there's many, which is the idea of choice. And capitalism as a system is one that removes choice because in a capitalist system, you're limited by what you can do based on how much money you have,
Yeah.
or the luck of the draw in terms of like, can you get this job, or are there too many? Are all the jobs taken? Oh, now you don't have a job, or oh, the only job in your area pays $7.25 an hour, which is the same minimum wage since like 50 years ago, and it's worth like half of what it is but back then can't sustain a single person living on that full time. Like,
Hmm.
so like the idea is that capitalism removes choices, and I think basically my favorite quote, or I guess my favorite like series of quotes in the entire game is the one that Noah makes in to like his younger self in that like dreamscape when he's like about to get his head chopped off, and he basically points out that like his whole like thing is he wants to know the meaning behind the smile, right? The smile
Hmm.
of Chris, of Yorin, you know, the people
Yeah.
who died, right? He wants to know the meaning behind the smile, and he comes to the conclusion that the reason why they smiled before they died is because they were content, right? And like you could just leave it at that, they're content, right? But it's like, but isn't it kind of messed up that the only way that they could be content is through sacrifice? Where we
Yeah.
live in a society where the only ways in which we can feel a sense of sort of satisfaction is in the most like the I guess I should say like the least fulfilling things about you. Like why should we be fulfilled about our success in a job when we have like very little control over what we actually do in that job?
Yeah.
Because in a job, you have the boss who tells you what to do, and you do everything. And if you slip up once, they yell at you, and your job's like at stake. And it's like, how is anyone supposed to be fulfilled by that? It's the same thing as
Hmm.
Xenoblade. Like they can't be fulfilled by anything meaningful, like their relationships, their talents. Like this is obviously shown with like Shania as well, where like her art, Yorin and his puppet making or whatever he did, like his sculpting or whatever it's called.
Hmm.
Like these things are not fulfilling; they're not important. It's just, oh well, you sacrifice yourself for the cause. They're content to that, and
Yeah.
the idea that Noah's like, he's like, he's like, I want to know the meaning behind the smile, and they were content. But like, why did it have to be this way? I want to
Hmm.
make a world where people can smile on their own terms.
Mm-hmm.
So if the world won't let us choose outside of these narrow bounds, which is fighting, then I want nothing more than to destroy the world.
Yeah.
Destroy because Mobius is the world, Mobius is capitalism. So if we destroy capitalism, we can create a world that allows people to make meaningful choices,
Yep.
which
And
is
that's what that's when he draws Lucky Seven.
yeah,
We start
yeah.
getting all those awesome battle quotes about how like I'll tear it all down. Like literally, like that's his character growth. He has reached that point.
Yeah, and like that's the thing I was mentioning before about like the whole giving birth. People don't have the choice to give birth, but like now he has the choice to fall in love with Mio, and he has
Yeah.
the choice if he wants to in the future to have a kid. I mean, his past self made that choice,
Yeah.
and
It's
it's kind
so
of presumed that they'll do that again. Like they'll when the world split and then recombine again, they'll find each other and they'll be couple for all of eternity. I don't know.
but yeah, like it's so like I can see it's so easy for people to like miss the point of that scene of like this is how babies are made and making it all about how like making babies is great. But like that's not going from
It's a
that's not coming
choice.
from it's not coming from a right-wing place of you have to make babies because we need more labor. It's coming from a place of you have the freedom to form relationships, to fall in love, to create things instead of destroy. Like create life. Like that whole concept is completely mind blowing to the party because they've only ever known destruction.
Yeah,
And the
and
idea
I
of
don't know.
creating more people, like whoa, that's insane. Like that
Yeah, and
you could do that.
I don't know if you took note of this, but when Monica's explaining the idea of romance to Noah and Mio at the time where they're already kind of starting to realize that they have feelings for each other, she
Yeah.
doesn't say when a man and a woman get together and like
Yeah.
each other. She explicitly says like when two people really like each other. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
just thinking like two people, not like a man and a woman, two people. So like romance is up for anyone, right? So
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. And it's not
so like
just about
yeah.
procreation. It's just about like nurturing something. Like, there's it's about creating
Passing on.
something.
It's about
Yeah.
passing it on. Like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
thing is,
yeah.
this is another thing I find interesting because like Rex's whole situation is very like unconventional. Because think about it, he had multiple wives, and as much as we can meme about the whole harem thing, his whole life has been sort of like unconventional family situations. Like
Yeah.
he's adopted, his family's basically just a bunch of orphans that he provides support for. So he's very unconventional in that sense. So the idea of having multiple wives probably wasn't even something that like was like, "Oh, well, is this like a normal thing to do?" Because like he's
Yeah.
already abnormal. He's outside of the hegemon of like cis hetero monogamy. Um,
Yes.
so it's like, well, I want to make if I want to. I already have a big family. If I want to make the family bigger, then I can just do that. Why not? Make the family big. Like Pyre even says in like some side content, like I think if you talk to like Corinne is her name, I think she mentions about wanting to have a big family like the one that Rex has in Vonset. And I'm just thinking like, so like obviously they're not trying to enforce like rigid heteronormative monogamous like hegemony because like it's about choices, right? And this is also something I kind of appreciated with because like Noah and Mio are pretty blatant. Tyon and Uni are also pretty blatant. Lance and Senna aren't pretty blatant as a pair. Like
Hmm.
intuitively it would make sense because like, oh well we have the two other Ouroboros pairs and they're an Ouroboros pair and Ouroboros is like a thing is like love, right? It's a symbol for love, but like it's not
Hmm.
really.
Yeah,
And
that's one thing I was afraid of when I first played the game. Is like this is just going to be like a forced cishet sort of thing because like male female pairings and all that. But
I
I
mean, we
don't
already know
think
that's
that's
not true
actually
because
what's
in
going
Future
on. Yeah.
Redeemed, yeah, in Future Redeemed, the original like founders, remember there's four girls and two guys, right?
Yeah.
Um and then we have like so we know that one of the pairs, well, I guess Matthew never actually formed a pair with Niall because he went off on his own journey or whatever. But in terms of the other two, the pairs were Nickel and Glimmer, and the other pair was Linka and Panacea. Now,
Mm.
if Ouroboros is supposed to be about love, well then they would be lesbians. We don't know that for certain because we know like very little about them. So it's either they're lesbians or it's not a symbol for love and it's just it's a symbol of people coming together from different
Yeah.
backgrounds, which is obviously what they did because it was one Agni and one Kavesi, right? Or in the
It's
case of Linka and Panacea, one
it's
from
communion.
Alres, one from Bionic.
It's building community, building relationships, and Like,
Yeah, and that's why I like the Lands and Senna thing, because their whole arc has like nothing to do with romance. Is it
yeah,
possible that they will get in a romantic relationship? Maybe Xenoblade 4, the world are
maybe
combined and they meet each other. Maybe, but it's not explicit. It's not the point because their whole relationship is
they're
never
bros.
ever. Yeah, they're gym buddies. They're like, we work out, we have no brain cells, but we want to get buff. You know, like there's more to it than that. Obviously, I think there's actually a lot of nuance to their relationship because they're both very insecure and they support each other in ways that make them feel better about each other. And they're like the example of like positive what do you call it? Like positive platonic relationships,
Yeah,
not just between like men and women, but also just in general. Because
yeah.
a lot of if you notice in the real world, people's relationships are like littered with irony and self-deprecating humor. Nobody can be
Mm,
genuine, and I feel like a big part of their arc is being genuine with other people and with each
yeah,
other. Which is
yeah.
also why this
That's
I
something you
can't say
both
this is like
struggle with.
certain. I can't say this is like for certain, but I've also kind of felt that Lance's character arc is kind of like a criticism of toxic masculinity
Yeah, a little bit.
because
Even
like
like, even the way like he starts interacting with Colony Mew, and like, how that's like a very not masculine sort of colony, but like he ends up finding like a new sense of identity and supporting like all the people there. It's really
but
cool.
he's a guy who really likes to act tough, and through his relationship with Senna he kind of starts to realize like this other person is also like kind of in the same boat as me. They're both insecure, and like we don't just
Yeah,
have to bottle it up inside and try to man up or whatever. Like we can just be gem with each other and just support each other because we have the
it's so
same
good.
goals and we're better
Yeah,
together than we are apart. So
yeah.
like, and like another note I wanted to like a really neat detail, a reason why I think my theory kind of tracks is, remember the prison scene where things are like they're losing all hope and everything is depressing, and then everybody who watched that
Yeah.
scene cried their eyes out. Yeah, you notice how Lance was the only one that wasn't crying.
Yeah.
You notice that he's the only one. Everybody was sobbing their eyes out, and Lance is like, "I'm a tough guy. I'm not
Yeah.
crying. I'm miserable, but I'm not crying."
Yeah. But still, like, I think this is definitely a story about sort of that emotional honesty, and just it's really
Yeah,
good.
because like, yeah, there's a lot of like awkwardness early on, but as time goes on, the characters become a lot less awkward, a lot
Mm,
less. I don't know what the word is, but it's when you talk in a way that's like non-confrontational, where you like don't like say what you mean or whatever, and that those barriers go down
mm,
over the course of the series, where the characters are more honest with each other,
yeah,
more natural with each other. You
yeah.
see it with Noah and Mio, you see it with Uni and Tyon, you see it with
Tyon,
Lance and
yeah.
Senna.
Tyon was like so stoic, and then like he actually starts, being honest with his emotions, and it's so good to see.
Yeah, especially since he's such a dork.
Yeah.
I'm a serious McSerious guy, and then like one thing slights him, and he's like freaking out, and it's like, man, that's the real Tyon.
Yep. Yeah, it's good. All these characters have so many layers to them, and like, I feel like, especially shipping Lands and Senna together, I feel like they don't want you to do that almost, because like it's really suggested that Senna is like has feelings for Mio. Like she's very queer coded.
I actually don't agree with that because like the thing is that I feel it's more of like a sort of like sisterly relationship. Like she looks up to Mio as like an
That's
older sister.
possible. It's
Well,
possible.
it's not. Well, it's also because the promotional material for the game straight up said it as well. So like, no, I'm not even joking. Like the actual like when they started introducing, remember the character chart is only in Japanese, so it was like translated, but people were translating the chart, and it's literally like Arrow from Senna to Mio sees as older sister or something like that.
Well, fair enough. But yeah, I still think that headcanon is perfectly valid. Um, but anyway, we're not here to discuss ship validity or anything. I don't want to get into that
Also,
territory.
also as an aromantic,
Oh,
maybe
I didn't
maybe
know you were
they're not.
aromantic. Huh.
I have it in my Twitter. Oh no, I can't dead name my X bio.
Oh no. Oh my
uh,
goodness.
but uh, but yeah, I'm just thinking like I'm not saying like it's confirmed or whatever. Like I just like obviously I don't think that they're romantically into each other. They could be romantically into someone else. Who knows? But I don't know. They at least when it comes to each other, I don't see them as like romantically into each other. So who knows? Maybe they're not into that sort of thing. Like I said, it's all about
Yeah,
choice,
sure.
right? Like I'm an
Yeah.
aromantic. I'm not offended by like, oh, this game's telling me we need to. The meaning of life is to get into a relationship. This offends me. Like, no, I'm aromantic, and don't see it that way. I don't think it's like enforcing like, oh, I have to get into a relationship because I don't want
Yeah.
to, and nobody can force me to. And I don't think
Yeah.
Xenoblade's trying to tell me to do that either.
Yeah, it's about freedom and choice. And being able to choose not to just, give up your life for people who don't care about you, basically. Man.
You know what we haven't discussed in depth yet?
What?
The worst character in the game, so evil. I can't believe she did that, Shania.
We talked about it briefly.
Yeah, but I just wanted to bring this up because I do not understand why people hate Shania with so much like visceral hatred
Yeah.
compared to other characters in the game. I've seen some people suggest it might be like misogyny or whatever. Where like, oh well, women can't be evil, only men can be evil because when a man is evil, it's cool and edgy, and when a woman's evil, it's hysterical or whatever. That could be it. Maybe it's it for some people, probably not all.
It's
Or
probably a
maybe it's like a
factor.
sort of it could be like social conditioning because we are kind of socially conditioned to believe that kind of crap. But
Yes.
I just don't understand because like how can someone like be like, man, I hate Shania. She tried to annihilate the city, and I'm just like, what about N, who
Yeah.
actually did annihilate the city and continues to be a thorn in the side of the entire world of Ionios, the entire
Mm.
series through? Like, I don't know. I don't understand it.
She's a hard pill to swallow, I think. But she
Well,
is.
another thing that I saw, which I think is really stupid, is people are like, she's just like basically Hitler.
We
You know why they
literally
think
have
that?
Mobius in the story. Come on.
Yeah, I know. But you know why they were saying that? You know why they were saying that? They were saying it because she tried to like genocide the city, and two because she was an artist, and Hitler was also an artist.
Oh, fuck off.
The
Fuck
the
you, whoever
biggest
said
the
that.
biggest reach the big I've seen multiple people say that. It's not one person.
Oh my
But
god.
it's such a reach. First of all, Hitler was not a good artist. He was trash. He's anti-art. I mean, it's kind of like the whole fascist thing. They're anti-art. But the whole thing
Yeah.
about thing is, first of all, she was a good artist. I feel like people don't understand about her character arc. I've seen a lot of really dumb takes about the character arc where they're just like,
God.
she had all the support she could ever want, and she just threw it all away. And I'm just like, in what universe? Like,
Yeah.
she did not have all the support.
No.
Like
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
Gondor.
Shania
Like
is
obviously
good.
her father wanted her to do her art, and then her father died. And then Gondor was like, man, you shouldn't copy other fighting styles. You shouldn't fight. You should just do art as well. And people were like,
Yeah.
oh well, she got the Gondor seal of approval. She got her father's seal of approval. What is she so mad about? And I'm just thinking like, well, one, the world is designed for people to fight being like their sole sense of value. She comes from a family that has a very heavy focus on that. It's like her family's reputation to like they need to fight because it's their honor. Like I genuinely feel like Shania's mother, despite being with the lost numbers, because obviously like the lost numbers fight is like just because they're fighting against
Mm.
Mobius. But
Mm.
I feel like she sees it more as like a badge of honor and a sense
Yeah.
of duty more than like an actual like what do you call it? Like a principled stance against Mobius or whatever.
Yeah. It
And she kind
really
of just
is a perfect depiction of the ugliness of this kind of thing. That even if you have characters you're portraying as the good ones fighting the fight, it doesn't mean that they are going to be perfect. There are still going to be interpersonal conflicts. There are still going to be people that act in bad faith. Whether you're right or left or whatever, it's always going to be like there's always going to be something. And like no society is perfect, but that doesn't
yeah,
mean it's not worth fighting for
and
either.
the funny thing is that Shania's mother is basically pushing the same sort of ideology that Mobius is pushing, and that fighting
Yeah, yeah.
is what makes you who you are. It's the important thing that defines you, and she's kind of
Yeah,
just had that
yeah.
drilled into her. So the idea, like, oh, she had all the support she wanted. Well, her father died. Her
Mm,
sister also died,
mm.
both from fighting. So like, her support supposedly are dead. So when you're the only family you have left is your mother, and then she drills in the idea that like this is your value, you need to fight. This is
Mm.
what's important. She's not going to think that art is important, right? So
Yeah,
that's why she joins Mobius because she's already fully ingrained at this point that the idea is that the most important thing is fighting, and
yeah,
if that is the most important thing, then why fight against the fate you can't win when you can just join the cycle? And then she joins
yeah,
Mobius to perpetuate said cycle.
yeah,
And that's the reason why. It's not just like bad writing and they don't know what they're doing. It's like, no, that's why. It's because that's the propaganda she's been fed her whole life, and then she
yeah.
just it got so bad for her that she just kind of started believing it.
And I think that's like, you could point to something like anti-fascist movements, which are in their own way, like they are very much principled. That I think we do need to fight fascism directly, but you need to fight it on an ideological front as well as a material front. Because if you only fight fascism with, hatred and this idealization of fighting, then we're not really any different from fascists. Like, that's how we perpetuate the cycle, because fascism isn't just like a faction, it's something that exists in everyone. It's something we're all capable of perpetuating. And so we need to fight it on an ideological level before we actually start, getting out and protesting, rioting, or whatever it is. I'm not endorsing calls for violence on this stream. I'm just saying. Um, we need to fight it on an ideological and personal, spiritual level first before we take the fight to
This is
anything more
literally
physical.
like this is literally what Feature Redeem's about. Like at the end
Yeah.
of the game where Niall is being confronted, Niall's like the perfect world, all this kind of crap. And then Matthew is just like, no, if you create a world with that sort of division, you just be the same as Mobius. The world will
Yeah.
end up just like how Klaus's world did, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, if you're not like ideologically committed to fighting against oppression, you will become the oppressor. You
Mm-hmm.
just replace one Mobius for another Mobius.
Yeah.
Like,
That's it.
and I also feel like it's because you know how there's like a sort of like cult religious sort of mentality. It's like its own brand of fascism in the world right now,
Yeah.
where a lot of people, it's basically like a doomsday cult where nothing in the real world really matters. It's just about
Yeah.
the few chosen ones trying to move on to the afterlife, like kingdom of
Yeah.
heaven, and then everyone else is damned to
Very,
hell.
very future
That's alpha.
redeemed.
That's
Yeah.
alpha. That's
Yeah.
alpha. Like it's
Yeah.
alpha is the rapture. That's literally what he's trying to do. The rapture, the cult
Mm-hmm.
like idea of these are the chosen ones. These are the city people are the good ones. Everyone else are the lost sheep who, they lost their way. They're all violent. They wanted this because he even like when you really think about it, like from Alpha's perspective, because remember he's a machine. They
Yeah.
wanted this. They
Yeah.
they they're the ones that created Mobius, the people, right? So of course
Yeah.
he's just going to cast them off aside, which I also saw as sort of like an analogy for like the idea that like of crime, where crime, like 99% of it is social. It's not these people are evil for the sake of being evil and commit crime.
Yeah.
No, the bourgeois does that. But for
Yeah.
most people, it's their material needs aren't being met,
Yeah.
so they resort to
Yeah, they're
extreme
not
measures.
they're not
And
being met by legal means and following the system, so they
and
they do what they can to survive.
And the unfortunate reality is that the people in power sort of use this fact to their advantage to demonize these people and also,
Yep.
like spread bigotry and stuff. So it's like,
Yep.
oh, well, 1350 black people commit more crime on average. And it's just like, well, we had slavery and then generational poverty, and they don't have the means to support themselves. So then they get into this stuff. And then we also have over policing and
Mm-hmm.
over reporting and all this kind of crap. And it's like obviously if someone commits a violent crime, you would understand like, okay, like obviously I don't want to like redeem them or forgive them or whatever, but it's also like you got to understand like these people aren't like irredeemable terrible people. They're people who are suffering, and we need to reach out a
Yeah.
hand. We need to create a society where these people don't have to be poor, they don't have to live in poverty, they don't have to live in like all these abject terrible situations,
Yeah.
because they're worthy of living in a good world. It's not just
Yeah.
like, oh, they're bad, we have to cast them aside. And this is why those liberals that try to be like, oh, well, the conservatives voted for this bad thing, so we should just like create a left-wing society that is only of left-wingers where we get all the good stuff. And it's just like, no,
Yeah.
that's not how it works. Even
No.
if you don't like someone, the policy that you advocate for should still apply to them.
Yes, I
Like
agree
conservative
100%. It's
conservatives
it's like
still
I'm
deserve health care.
yeah, it's like universal healthcare. I'm very like a prison abolitionist. Like even like Nazis, I feel like in my perfect utopia, even Nazis deserve food and water. Maybe they should be isolated from the rest of society. Maybe. I don't know. I'm still on the fence about that. But they should be treated as human. They should have their basic human rights met. And they should, be hopefully, given resources and what they need to de-radicalize them out of that sort of
Yeah,
worldview.
like I'm all for de-radicalizing, and also like the idea is that if the world is better, people don't fall into that as easily
Yeah,
because
exactly.
like you don't have a scapegoat to like, oh well, your life sucks, well here's all this propaganda. Like if you don't have that sort of scapegoat and your material needs are being met, it's much harder for you to fall into those like rabbit holes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's about, creating a safety net that everyone supports everyone else. And then we that gets rid of 99% of crime. Like, there's still going to be
Yeah,
some problems, but nothing's perfect. But
like that's the
so
idea
much
of prison
crime is
abolition.
preventable. Yeah, so much crime is preventable by just having a good social safety net that supports people instead of
'Cause-
criminalizing people.
Yeah, because if people commit crimes because their material needs not being met, if their material needs are met, they commit significantly less crimes, and after
Hmm.
significantly less crimes, we need significantly less prisons because we don't need them anymore,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Isn't it
There's also the
great
fact
that there's literally a side story in this game about turning a prison into like public housing?
that that is pretty funny.
Oh wait, you haven't done that quest yet, but that is literally. Wait, you did it?
Have I? Is that Sagiri's?
It's Sagiri's, yeah. Sagiri's like a whole
Okay,
ascension
I
thing.
haven't done the ascension yet, but I did do the some of the quests about the prison where like we're establishing it as a home. I haven't
Yeah, yeah,
gotten
okay,
to the
okay.
ascension part yet. I
Yeah,
think
well,
because like I did,
definitely,
yeah,
definitely
I
worth
think I
doing.
have it unlocked. I just haven't started yet.
Like they
But I
literally
did
like
all
turn
the
like the
setup.
canteen there into like a restaurant where you can get like a really good like buff for your party. It's just like
Yeah,
yes, this
I
is
might have unlocked that.
great.
Yeah, I think it's like the prerequisites to starting Sagiri's Ascension quest. I think it did all the prerequisites.
Okay,
It's
okay,
just that
yeah,
around that time, I think I started playing something else. So
fair enough. But yeah, like people do the side quests in this game. It really enhances the narrative in a way that like I wasn't expecting. But yeah, and God, I think we're starting to get it's starting to get late over there, so we should probably start wrapping up now. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we wrap this podcast up, Days?
there's probably like 20 things, and I forgot them.
I mean, one thing I will talk about just briefly is the queer representation in this game is fucking great. We got canon non-binary characters in Juniper and A.
A.
We have not enough gay relationships. I'll say that we need more gay relationships in this game. But there's definitely like, we got representation of unconventional family structures with like Rex
Rex.
and his
Rex.
polyamorous relationship. People will very easily meme that as like, oh, Giga Chad with all of his harem of wives. And it's like, get the fuck
Hey,
out of here! Like,
there's
polyamory
there's nothing
exists.
there's nothing more Giga Chad than having a loving relationship and caring for your children and being a good person that supports the family and wants the world to be a better place. There's nothing
You
more Giga Chad. No, there's
you
nothing
ain't
more
you
Giga
ain't
Chad
wrong.
than walking into a room and being like, this person is non-binary. It means they have they them pronouns. There's nothing more Giga Chad than supporting
Truly.
someone's gender identity.
You're not wrong. But yeah, I think we mean it in a different way than a lot of these other memers do. But yeah, Rex is, I love Rex. He's so good. Especially like, I know he was always good, but I really love him in this game.
Because
um,
he just carries on everything that like ideologically what Xenoblade 2 is about. He just carries it into Xenoblade 3 with
yeah,
charisma,
I feel
you
like
know?
he really is like the heart of the whole liberation movement. Because I
He
made
showed it with
I,
Finger 3.
I, I feel like, yeah, no, he was like, he wasn't the leader of the liberators, but he was the heart of the liberators, I feel like. And that kind of extends to the philosophy of the founding of the city and all that stuff. I made a tweet thread on Twitter where I'm like, I feel like if Rex wasn't around, Shulk would just get really depressed and probably
Bro,
like,
Shulk says man, I'm losing my edge with age or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah,
And
he's
it's just
like,
like
he's so
I,
tired in that game.
it kind of speaks to like a real world phenomenon where like people are like, oh, you get more conservative as you age. I do think that's kind of like socially engineered, but it's also like if you're living through like the same shit, it just keeps happening. And like
Yeah,
because like Shulk, like he did all this work and it's like, man, and now Mobius, like, come on, I just saved the world. It's like it's
yeah,
understandable that
yeah,
he'd just be getting tired. It's like, can't I catch a break? It kind
yeah.
of speaks to like a real world sort of like, can't we just like win for once, you know?
And the first time we see Shulk in Future Redeemed, I kind like the way he was presented was weird. It was like it felt like he was almost a villain character at first.
I
Um,
actually thought he was going to be a villain because like the whole thing
yeah.
with him teaming up with Zed, I'm just thinking like we have a truce with Zed. I'm just like you have a truce with Adolf Hitler? like what?
Yeah, like it kind of feels like if Shulk wasn't like steered in the right direction morally, he might lose his way and he might actually start doing some extreme things. But then you have Rex appear and he's exactly the same as we knew him. Like he's definitely a little bit more like tired and jaded, but he's still the same Rex we know. He's still like overflowing with optimism and charisma, and I feel like he's the beating heart of the Liberators and really what kept everyone going.
Yeah, he does.
That's how I feel about it, and just seeing that go forward into like the actual Xenoblade 3 story, I feel like he's definitely the one that kept the fight going all that time. It feels like to
Yeah,
me.
I love me some Rex quotes, although I'm really upset we never learned the fifth rule of the Salvager's Code.
The-
Maybe the fifth rule of the Salvager's Code is if a non-binary person is about to come out, assist them or something like that. I don't know.
yeah,
Respect people's gender pronouns
yeah,
and I don't know, and the world be safe. I don't
and
know. I
love
don't know.
your
That's the problem.
wives.
Rex walking in with his 3 wives. I'll show him a thing or 3.
Oh, the memes write themselves. Holy shit. But yeah, like I was saying, just yeah, I feel like queerness is also a big theme of Gnosticism. It kind of comes through in a lot of the stuff I've read, but basically just like this whole idea that the flesh is kind of an illusion. The real self exists somewhere deeper. And I feel like that's a very good narrative, like to hold on to as as myself a non-binary person. I feel like my outward presentation of gender is only one part of me, and I feel like there's something else to that. There's something
Well, yeah,
more
like
fundamental, and gender is really just society's constructs, like placing people in boxes. Splitting the
yeah,
world
like
into
it's made
two
up.
when it doesn't need to be that
It's
way.
it's made up. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's, that comes out really well in Xenoblade 3 with its, treatment of non-binary people. It's so cool. And also, one more thing I really want to bring up, the Turken quest, which is Gondor's Ascension quest. Xenoblade games have been really weird about Turkens. I feel like, they're obviously sentient and intelligent, but they're just treated as monsters. And that's always kind of pissed me off. Like, it feels very racist because, they're very, like, tribal coded. It's just, what's going on there? And I'm going to be
I
honest, Xenoblade 3 hasn't been perfect with it. There was literally, like, a quest where you can choose to exterminate a group of Turkens. You can also choose not to, and it's a lot harder. Maybe that's a message, but I still think that given the option to exterminate them was a bad call. But when they have a quest where we're literally like speaking with Turkens and being like, oh, like you just want to support your family, you're literally the same as us. Like, it's really heartwarming, and I wish they kind of take that further in future games because
yeah, I do
why do
feel
we
like
treat them different? Like,
I
it
feel
doesn't make
like
sense.
I feel like there's one of two things. One, either they didn't think too deeply into it when just creating Turkins in general, even from
I
like the
agree.
first game.
That's
And the other theory
exactly what happened.
is so like you know how Monolith's like structure is for their studio, where basically it's like they actually only have like 3 positions in the studio, where I think it's like art, programming, and like leadership or whatever.
Uh
And the
huh.
idea is that because there's so much flexibility that people can contribute their own ideas and stuff. I get the impression, I could be wrong, that a lot of the side content in the game is just a bunch of different people
I
making up
agree.
stuff. And if
Absolutely.
that's the case, it
I think
makes
that's why
sense.
there's mixed messaging. Yeah.
Yeah, there could be some sort of incongruence. That's actually now this is for the side stories, not just the regular side quests, but there's actually a pretty like blatant contradiction between Uni and Tyon's side stories. I don't know if you noticed or remembered it.
Hmm.
But it's when Uni shows the dog tag of the previous Uni. She shows it in both quests, but when she shows it, it's brought up like it's the first time she's showing it, and
Oh.
it's the first time in both quests when she's showing it. So like when she shows it in her own, I think I did her own first. She like shows it to everyone. They're like, "Oh, why didn't you tell us about this or whatever?" And then in the Tyon quest, she shows it to Tyon, and then Tyon's like, "Whoa, why didn't you tell me about this?" And I'm
Yeah,
like,
I didn't
"But
notice
she
that
did."
actually. Huh. Well. Yeah, I agree. I 100% like these games are made by big teams. Not every piece of writing is going to be congruent. It's a natural consequence.
Although
But
when it comes to the side
yeah, the Ascension quests I feel like had a lot
stories, I don't know
more
if that's the case of like
direction.
different writers among just like regular people. Yeah, because the side stories for the characters are like a lot more like meaningful to the story that I'd assume
Yeah.
would probably have just been written by Takahashi as well. But who knows? I mean, even Takahashi can have blind spots where he forgets stuff.
Yeah.
Like
Sure.
it's a giant game, obviously.
Yeah,
There could
it's
be minor
just so
mistakes
much
like
to
that.
oversee. It's going to be problems like that.
Yeah,
But yeah,
that's actually
like
one of my complaints with the game is that I feel like the side story should have just been put into the game instead of being side stories. Like I know Mio and Noah's are like required, but I feel like the other 4 should have just been implemented at some point.
There's like
in my
I was watching some like content from like looking at the art book of the game, and it's very interesting that Shania is portrayed as a playable character. Like in the art book, it's heavily suggested that she was going to be a hero at some point. And so like
Should make her a
maybe
DLC hero.
yeah,
Should be a DLC hero. That'd
maybe
be sick.
Shania's whole thing was like she was actually going to be like more part of the main story, but they kind of like had to cut it out.
Well, yeah, stuff like that always happens. You know, they changed ideas or whatever.
Because
But
they couldn't figure out how to include it in the main story,
I
which I
just think
get.
that
It
the
is
side
kind of like
stories,
unrelated.
I feel like the character side stories specifically do so much for the characters and the story that I feel like that they really should have been required instead of just being this thing on the side that you can totally miss, especially with
Yeah,
Senna, because it's like Shania, you know, she shoots herself and then she becomes Mobius, whatever, or like it's implied that she'll become Mobius, but like you never get a resolution to that unless you do Senna's side story. And I'm just thinking
yeah,
like, and while for most of them you can kind of piece together where they might exist in the narrative, because remember, like I said, there's the sort of issue with the side quests where like they don't fit into the narrative because like uh you know you're traveling all over Ionios and they're in a time crunch or whatever. But when it comes to the side stories in specific, it's there's sort of like a way that you can kind of move them in. Like for example, Uni side quest you unlock right after you get to the city, and they tell you like, oh, you can go to this one, you know, that dining area in the city that's like the higher up dining area where like it's not like a restaurant, it's just like a little camp or whatever.
yeah. Where
Yeah,
they have their outside of their apartment or whatever.
yeah, they say that like, oh well, before you go to rest in your apartment, you can, you know, go there and hang out or whatever. And that my placement of the uni side story would be there. Now the main thing is like, okay, well, how would they get back to the location at the beginning of the game, or not beginning of the game, but like chapter 2, chapter 3 or whatever, when it's like it took like 2 months to get here. And I just kind of like reason it like, oh well, they have airships in the city, maybe they took an airship. And because remember, like the timeline of events when they get to the city is like the tour happens like the day after they arrive, or not the tour,
Yeah,
the mission starts the day after they arrive. So
yeah,
that's like the only place you can really slot the uni thing. Although an interesting fact about the uni side story is that if you do it later, it'll actually change the dialogue when you meet X in chapter 5 in the prison break scene. It'll change it very slightly, where
really. Oh,
yeah, it's very slight change. Where if you do it before if you do that side story before, she'll be like X, like she'll say it like emphatically, like she knows X. But
oh,
if you do it
wow, that's
afterwards,
cool.
if you do it yeah, if you do it afterwards, she'll be like X, is it?
Wow,
But
I
I
never.
do think
That's cool.
the best way to slot it would be like at that time, just when they arrive at the city and before they actually
Mm,
go to sleep. The
yeah,
next one is Lands. Lands does not fit well into the story whatsoever because you unlock it right after, you know, when you're going in the islands and you're trying to get all this information, whatever. I think it's
mm.
right after you invade one of the Agnes bases and you get like the coordinates or whatever. I think it's like right after that you
You
unlock the
spent a lot
Lands
of
one.
time thinking about this, huh?
Yeah, because I'm just thinking like these should be a part of the main story, and if they were, where would you slot them? Because I feel like I said, the side quests aren't canon, but these should be canon because they provide meaningful character development. They provide
Yeah.
more to the plot. So like the lands one doesn't really fit well because it's like the implication would be that they went into the islands, did their mission, went back to the city, lands, you know, saw the people in the city, and then they did the quest that involved his former, like the reincarnation of the dead children from his colony or whatever, and then you
Mm,
know he has his character development and stuff, but like it doesn't really fit in terms of a timeline. And then you
yeah.
have the Tyon one. The Tyon one's a bit confusing, but my best way of slotting it is right after the events like of early chapter 6, where they're like, oh, we're cleaning up the castle, because it's implied that there's like an unspecified amount of time that goes between when that fight with the queen, the fake queen, ended and
Yeah.
when you move along the plot.
Yeah.
So my thing is, because I think that's actually when you unlock the Tyon quest. So my thing is like, oh well, they're probably going around the islands looking for materials for the people of the castle or whatever, and then they just happen to stumble upon the Nimue thing. Because remember, it was brought up in chapter 3, the you know the trinket that Tyon has, and the whole thing about like there's this place with sophronia trees, and it's like it feels like the fact that that actually getting a resolution to that is skippable is wild to me. And
Mm.
then the best place I can put the Senna one, that's pretty easy, is remember the treasure hunt where they're just going all around Ionios looking for the pieces of the boat or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
that it could literally be anywhere around there because they literally get a call saying, "Come back to the city quick, we're being invaded." So that could take place anywhere in that sort of like
Yeah. Yeah.
area. So that one slot's a lot easier. But I just think they should have made it a part of the main plot because the fact that like important character and plot moments could just be skipped, especially when they also add to like the depth and richness of the game, I feel like they should have just put it in the main plot, like
Well,
Noah and Mia's were.
since we're on the topic of like criticisms of the game, I do have some, and like you said, that's one of them. Um, I get the feeling that the game is a little bit unfinished, like just a tiny bit. Like it's almost completely done, but there's just little bits that feel like weren't given enough attention. Like you said, maybe they didn't have enough material to write those ascension quests, and they just kind of took things out of the main story and put them in there to make it work. That's possible. But
I
there's
feel like
also
they have to
like
make
the
an
most
active
obvious,
choice.
the biggest tell was the origin fights. Like, what was going on with X and Y? Like, they don't even have like a cutscene for dying. Like, that was extremely strange when I played it.
Fun fact, another fun fact: if you don't do Unity's side quests, you don't fight X.
Really? What happens?
Yes, you just fight a bunch of monsters, a bunch of weird origin spiders.
That's weird.
That's another thing why I'm thinking like why like X is one of the big three villains and you can just like completely skip her even though she appears in the main plot during the prison break scene and
Yeah, they
during
just didn't.
the off
They
scene
did,
scene
it's like
in
they didn't know what to
after
do
the
with her.
cutscene. Like
Why?
yeah, that part probably was a bit rushed. I don't know if the whole like because funny thing, I actually thought my game froze when I beat X, and she was just like, "Why?" and she's screaming or whatever, and I'm just thinking like, is the game frozen or whatever? Because
Yeah,
she's just
yeah.
like
It's
her body's
you're
sitting
waiting
there,
for
and
a
I'm just like,
cutscene.
oh wait, I can just like walk. Because yeah, you would
Yeah,
expect. I don't know if it was like an active choice or if it was just rushing. Because I saw some people be like, "Oh, well, it's to like signify how unimportant they are or whatever," because
yeah.
they're so comically evil and bad that they don't have what's the word? They're not deserving of an epic fight scene. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like even thought that at one point, but I know it's kind of copium. Like that ain't
Definitely
right.
copium. It's definitely copium, considering how many epic fight scenes the series has had so far. Like, why stop
Yeah,
now? You know,
yeah,
especially with
it's
how epic the
strange.
final boss is. The final boss, like I know a lot of people complain because it's like an hour long, and if you lose, you have to start all over. But it's also like the coolest thing imaginable.
It's so good. Ah,
It's so
it's
sick.
really
I love
cool.
the part. So I was thinking, like, are they going to return the Xenogears thing where they do like the sitting in a chair talking about their feelings thing? Because that's also how in Xenogears how they did like the narration in Disc Two.
Yeah,
But they also
yeah.
have some moments where they like talk about their feelings in regards to the narration and the plot things that they're describing. So I was thinking, what if they brought back the chair? That would be such a cool callback. They didn't do that. Hi-Fi Rush does for some reason, but they didn't do that in Xenoblade 3. Um, but they did do something in the final boss that I kind of feel like is close to that, where they have like their powers locked by Zed, and then it's just like they kind of like have a realization about their character growth. It's like this is what we've done so far,
Yeah, yeah.
and we're
You got
free
like
of
the
your
cutscenes of
chains.
the characters
Yeah, like
past playing.
the chains that were put on them by Mobius and by the world, they're breaking free of those chains, and that allows them
Yeah.
to use their Ouroboros powers. That was so cool. I was like,
Yes.
damn, this is so freaking cool. I hope I don't lose.
It's very JRPG, but God, it just works considering everything they've been through up to that point. It just theming.
Bro, and then the
We
mech
have nothing
fight
to
with
lose but our chains.
the freaking mech fight with Melia and Nia taking the castles and turning them to gigantic mechs.
Oh,
I'm
that's
just like,
so anime.
this is so anime. It's so corny. It is so cool. Takahashi's such a nerd.
Yep, and we love him
Bro,
for it.
he's such a nerd. Like there's pretty shameless references to other things. Like a lot of people said like the whole off-seeing thing is very much just Final Fantasy X. True.
Yeah.
There's a shot in the game at the beginning of Noah's side story, which is literally just the Final Fantasy VII shot. You know that famous like looking up at Shinra building shot when he's looking up at the castle where Chris is. Shamelessly ripped from that. Like,
Chris is
there,
another thing that was like, what was going on with Chris? Like, what was that plot element all about?
well, I think the idea is that the original, not the original Chris, but one of the older Chris's, he's the one who made off-seeing. So like, he kind of wanted to see like the fruits of like the fruits of off-seeing, I guess.
Hmm.
I don't remember like super clearly, but the idea like I want to see this through to the end. What is off-seeing led to or whatever? I think that's what it was. My memory's like kind of vague of that one
It
though.
just feels half baked. Like, that's one part of the game where I'm like, I have no idea what that was all about. Just kind of weird. It felt like very Evangelion with Kaoru and Shinji sort of thing. Just like the character that knows everything and is all cryptic and stuff, and you need to kill me to move on. Like it just
Also,
felt like
the
that.
whole like N and Noah getting a headache in the presence of N, like that's just a Gundam reference. Just
Yeah,
just a straight Gundam reference. Like he's obviously Takahashi's obviously a Gundam fan. I mean, Gundam's so
yeah.
like culturally influential. Like obviously he's gonna reference Gundam.
He's a mech nerd, of course. But yeah, gosh, like even with these flaws, like I'd say like the final two chapters of the game, like story wise, are a lot more thrown together than the rest of the game. Um, but even so, this is still one of the best RPGs I've ever played, and I'd say it's probably the best game on Switch. Like I would rate it above Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom personally. Um, yeah, it's fantastic, and I feel like so many people are sleeping on it. There's just so many people that haven't given the Xenoblade series a chance because it looks too anime or something like that. It's
Like honestly, I didn't even have much of a problem with chapter 6 and 7 because chapter 6 is like after you do the whole like castle scene where you're fighting the Fate Queen. After that, it's basically just like Mio's side story and fighting the real queen, or
yeah,
not fighting, finding the real queen, finding Nia, and then you have that scene with Yorn. I thought that was really sick. The thing about chapter 7 is like the begin. A lot of people don't like chapter 7 because like the beginning of it is just that treasure hunt or whatever. The
yeah,
thing is, the treasure hunt doesn't really take that long if you like commit to it.
it
But
doesn't.
during the treasure hunt though, I committed like 25 hours of time just to doing side quest
Yeah,
before
it's definitely
continuing the treasure hunt.
that's the side quest part where it's like, okay, now's your chance to wrap up your side quest that you've been leaving
It
behind.
also makes the side quest feel more canon because like you're doing it in a time where like you're already traveling the world anyways, you know. Like obviously it isn't, but it kind of feels more canon. I literally spent
Yeah, yeah,
25 hours just doing side quests, and it was very
yeah.
fun because like the side quests are really good. And then after I
And
did that, I got all
I
the
suppose it's
pieces, and then you go
also
to Origin.
to add to your point. There's also the fact that Mio's life isn't like on a timer anymore, so like it feels like there's a little bit more breathing room to do stuff like that thematically.
Yeah, that is definitely true.
Yeah, because that's literally like scenes where Mio's like, I hate that we keep taking detours because I'm about to die. It's like that's definitely a bit of like clashing between the narrative and the gameplay. But even
Uh,
so, it still
the
works
the
thematically.
the scenes where like Mio's just like contemplating her timely demise is just so heartbreaking. I'm just
Yeah.
like, poor Mio with the droopy ears.
Yeah, they really had to pull the fucking cat ears on us.
Okay, but one more thing. You know what scene was really peak? Uh, Remember the scene where they're fighting P and O's fused form, and then Mio just punches them, and they get knocked over, and they're just like, and I'm just like, I was like, what the fuck is going on right now?
Oh, I
Mio,
love it.
I think it was at that moment that Mio became like one of my favorite characters of all time.
Yeah.
That scene was just like pure raw proletarian rage. It's like we are so done with
We are done with
the
this shit. Yeah.
pleasantries. We are done with the empathy. We don't even want to look at your face anymore because it's so ugly. We just want to like beat the shit out of you. And
Yeah.
the part where Lance was like, "Don't stop us, Noah. We're gonna kill them." And then Noah's like, "Oh, believe me, I wanna do it too." And he's like, "Oh, we're gonna kick your ass."
Yeah,
It's like
yeah. It's
that.
like I feel like there's so many like shonen and RPG stories which kind of hold back on that. They're like, no, we can't give in to pure violence because it's it's not the right way. But Xenoblade 3 has a lot more nuanced about it. Like they will absolutely like condemn violence for the wrong reasons, and they'll condemn like you know like hate when it is worthy of being condemned. But when it comes to a fascist, sometimes you just gotta punch the fucker, and Xenoblade like pulls no punches. Like it's yep.
Yeah, if there's
Sometimes
no
violence is the answer, which is
if
literally
there's
a
no
Tyrant
way,
quote.
true, true. Like if there's no way to achieve your results through peaceful means, then violent means become necessary. And
Yes,
like
absolutely.
that's the thing. It's like it also is also a little bit of like a revenge thing because of like Ethel and Kamaravi, but it's also like, yeah, it's fun watching these assholes just get
It's
obliterated. And
justified.
it also helps how epic the scene was where they
Yeah.
like they fuse and then they separate and they stab the ground and it destroys the thing and they fall down the cliff. Funny thing about that though, I had a really crack theory at the time that I thought that P and O was Zeke and Pandy from Xenoblade 2. Because the thing is, because P, she kind of had a Pandoria sounding voice and cadence to her, and also her name is Console P. And then Console O, while he didn't really sound like Zeke, um, his name is Consul. Oh, remember Zeke's real name is Ozzaclyrus. So I'm just thinking like, oh shit. But like,
Uh,
obviously it doesn't make sense when you think about it because they have to be from opposite sides to be able to fuse. And obviously Zeke and Pandy are both from Allrest, so it wouldn't really make sense for them to be able to interlink like that. But then there's
hmm.
also the part where they like the cliff destroys and they fall down the cliff, and I'm just like, is this a Xenoblade 2 callback where those comedy scenes? It was a crack theory that made sense at the time, and then you go through the story and you realize it doesn't actually make sense.
It's very cool. I never considered that. That's really funny.
Well, it was objectively wrong. It was objectively wrong.
Yeah, yeah, but amusing nonetheless.
But I just
Yeah.
realized we never got to the Annihilation events.
Well, what did you want to say about the Annihilation events?
Well, a lot of people complain about them because they're not really explained or whatever, but they kind of are. It's just not
They
like
are
told directly
explained.
to you. Well,
It's the
they're
universe
explained really
dying.
well, yeah, but like it's not explained like explicitly in detail what's going on. It's not until Future Redeem where they just say it in your face. But if you do like a little bit of inference, it's like, well, the world is Xenoblade. Once you get to like the chapter 6 scene, you can kind of piece it together where it's like the world's fused, but the worlds are destroying each other, and then that's the annihilation events. It's just because remember the world's frozen in time. It's just,
Yeah,
and so the annihilation events are just the world destroying itself in slow motion. And that's
yeah. You
also my
can't.
theory of what. That's
That's the
also what
whole idea. Like,
interlinking
you
is.
can't fully stop entropy. Like, it's even if you can slow it, the universe is still, moving towards its demise. Everything ends eventually.
Yeah, but that's also what interlinking is. It's literally just annihilation effect power. A lot of people don't
Huh?
realize that, but that's literally what it is.
What do you
Because
mean?
think about it. Okay, think about it this way. So you have you have the Ouroboros. They're one person from Agnes, one from Kevis. They fuse together, and they're on a timer. Once they're there for too long, it starts beeping or whatever, and it's
Hmm.
like, oh shit, they're about to die because it's an annihilation effect. They're using the power of annihilation. It's kind of like those annihilators that they had. It's just an annihilator basically. Ouroboros forms are annihilators, and so they're taking the annihilation power of the fusing and they're using that. But if they use it for too long, they annihilate themselves. Remember when Senna and Blands were trying to like sacrifice themselves to like explode N in the sky or whatever? They
Hmm.
were gonna have an annihilation effect until X broke them up, and they survived thankfully.
I wonder what that means thematically.
They also hinted it in the scene with O and P where they're just like, stop the infernal beeping, what's going on or whatever, because like they
Yeah.
don't know themselves because they probably never had to fight for that long against such a powerful foe
Yeah.
because they normally beat them right away. But
Yeah.
that's why they blew up, because remember they were in the form for so long and then they
Yeah. Of
destroyed the
course.
cliff and they fell down. They fell off the cliff and then they exploded because it was an annihilation event.
Hmm. Interesting. I never really thought about that. That's very interesting. Huh. But yeah.
But yeah, I
Gosh.
also think
So
that it kind of worked with the themes of the whole anti-capitalist thing, because it's like fascism doesn't last forever, capitalism doesn't last forever. It's an inherently destructive ideology, so
Hmm.
it necessitates that they move past it, like
Yeah.
in order they have to move past capitalist realism in order to reach a world that's not destroying itself, because
Either
fascism is
capitalism.
inherently.
Yeah. Either capitalism destroys itself or we destroy capitalism. Like, there's no two ways about it.
Yeah, and that's why I think the whole happy ending in Future Redeem, where you see the worlds fuse and it seems like everything's all great, it's earned, it's earned. Like
Hmm.
we deserve that happy ending. We come so far,
Yeah.
they deserve to not be annihilated.
Yeah. And they're passing it on to future generations, whatever that is. But yeah, like, I guess, like, before we wrap up, this is the precipice of a new generation of Xeno games, it seems like. We don't really know what's ahead, but so much of the theming of this game is about moving on from the past, and I feel like that can be taken in a meta aspect as well. Like, the developer interviews, Takahashi has stated that this is the end of the Class Saga. This is about moving on from the past, and I feel like Future Redeemed was very much like taking the past and wrapping it up in a neat, tidy bow. Like, it takes all the elements from the past games and gives us some resolution, except for the final salvages code. But almost everything else, all our lingering questions get resolved in that one. So it's like, everything's tied up. Where do we go from here? I really don't know. There's like lots of hints in Future Redeemed that Xenosaga is getting some sort of like return, but it remains to be seen if that's fully going to happen or not.
We don't know what's going to happen, but one thing we do know is that Takahashi is cooking. The kitchen is on fire, and
Yeah,
there's no fire department on the planet that's going to stop him.
it seems like it. Nintendo has really been the saving grace for Monolith Soft. It feels like they didn't get their chance with Xenogears and with Square, and they didn't get their chance on Xenosaga, but Xenoblade is finally the one where it feels like Takahashi is getting the freedom, the budget, and the team supporting him to be able to make the games he really wants to make. And it
Yeah, it
feels like
definitely
whatever comes next is going to be fucking crazy.
it
I can
definitely
feel it.
feels like with the Xenoblade games, it's like I feel like he has a sense of satisfaction. I can't read his mind, but I feel like he probably has a sense of satisfaction with these games that he
Mm,
didn't get with his previous works,
I
just because
agree.
they feel complete. Like
Yeah, I
even
mean,
Xenoblade 1 on its own works as a standalone story. It's a great
yeah,
standalone story, right? And
yeah,
then you
and
have the trilogy and it makes it better, but like
yeah,
he made something that he could be proud of and that he could feel fully not just like it's good, but it's satisfying, you know what I mean?
yeah. Like Xenoblade 1 was very much written as its own self-contained story. It wasn't even going to be a Xeno game until later in development when it was decided it would be.
Yeah,
Um,
Satoru Iwata was like, "No, we gotta pay homage to your history. Call it a Xeno game." And he's like, "Yeah,
Thank
sure."
you, Iwata. Bless you. Yeah. And Xenoblade 2 was very much written to be a series. It's part two of a trilogy. And now
The
that
funny
trilogy
thing
is
is
complete.
they could have ended it two as well. Like two also kind of feels complete. That's the funny thing.
Yeah, to an extent.
It to an extent, but also Takahashi said that he had Xenoblade 3 planned when he actually came up with Xenoblade 2, which is
Yeah,
also kind of
literally.
crazy to think about.
Yeah.
He's like, "Yeah, I had this like sword in the ground with a destroyed whale, like thing in mind the whole time." I'm just like, "What?
Yeah.
The galaxy brain in this guy?"
We love
And
him.
oh yeah, one final thing that I want to just like note on about Monolith Soft, since we're like talking about the studio, like they really practice what they preach because if you know anything about the game industry, it's garbage. There's a lot of overwork. There's a lot of just bad stuff going on in this industry. Monolith Soft is pretty unambiguously like the most progressive, like big studio. Like there's probably some indies that beat them in that regard, but like if you look at their like workplace policy and stuff, like they have like
I really
they,
haven't,
they,
so
they, oh well, there's been some quotes about how like our goal when like create with the studios, we want to like give people that we don't want them to overwork themselves. We want to give them time
mm,
off. We want to give them benefits and stuff. Like I remember there was like one quote about how like some people wanted to like do overtime and they were like, no, go home, you need rest or whatever.
really?
Um,
Wow, that's
if
so
you
rare for Japan. Wow.
if you look like online out there on their website, they have like all these different benefits you get for working for the company. Um,
Wow.
there's also the thing I mentioned, like the creative freedom thing. I mean, I feel like that thing kind of ties into like their like communist themes, where like it's not just like one creator and he's just telling all the rest what to do. It's like a real collaborative effort, you know.
Mm,
So like it's not just like the game has socialist messaging. I feel like the studio themselves believes it. Also, like another fun fact is that they actually have like a very high proportion of women in the studio compared to like
yeah.
most other game studios. I think it's like 30%, which it's not ideal, but like it's also like above like every other like non-indie studio.
Yeah.
So like they care about the issues in the real world just as much as they do in the game. And I think
Mm,
that's why something like Xenoblade 3 can exist because like you can make like I said, this is one of the few games where like you can be sure that they believe what they say
mm,
because not just the game itself, but also the studio itself. Most studios aren't like this. And they did mention that it was because they were bought by Nintendo that they were able to do this. And I know
yeah.
Nintendo isn't like the perfect company. There are studios that work for Nintendo that don't have like Monolith Soft level conditions. I know corporate Nintendo, a lot of people there don't have a good time, especially with like their contractors and stuff.
Yeah. It's
But
it's getting
they
worse
have
too.
the monetary capability to make their studios be like sustainable, and Monolith Soft took complete advantage of it. It's like we have the budget, we have the time, let's do what we want, let's do it right, let's do it healthily.
And it seems like
And
they have a great relationship with Nintendo because these teams are being brought on to help with like stuff like Zelda. I think
yeah,
Mario Kart as well. Like their main
Splatoon,
franchises.
Animal
Yeah.
Crossing. Yeah, because they
Yeah.
have like they have like, well, I think they have like three studios now. They have like a support studio which does like asset stuff for other games, and then they have like the actual like programming art, like 3D design studio or whatever, which is like does the Xenoblade, does the Zelda. And for a long time they've actually been hiring for quite a while over the past few years, which makes me wonder like what else are they cooking, because it's probably
I
not just Zelda. Are they
mean, they've
making
said,
something
like, I
else?
remember they were advertising for a new IP. Like, Like that was 5
Well,
years ago, I think, and we still
I
haven't
think
heard
that was
what
more.
that's.
That that had to be like 7 or 8 years ago. It's supposed to be like some action game, and they showed like some female protagonist or whatever. I want to know
Yeah.
what they're cooking with that. It's been cooking for way too long. It might be over. It might be burnt right now. Like I
Yeah.
don't know. Are they just putting on the seasonings? I have no idea what's going on. But
I mean,
I feel like there
I'm
has to
still
be
waiting for
something
Xenoblade X, X2.
with all the hiring they're doing. There has to be another team besides the Xenoblade team that's working on something else, which could be that action game.
Quite
That's
possibly,
just
yeah.
my guess.
But yeah,
And like,
I don't know if these conditions are going to continue forever, but at least right now, it sounds like things are going really well for them, and I hope they can continue to receive this support and be able to create this genuine art in an industry that's often feeling just so like vapid and soulless and just consumer products. Like I really feel like Xenoblade is something special in the current like climate of video games, and it's
bro, and so much
I
of
just really hope 3 isn't just the end of like these fantastic games. I hope we can look forward to many more to come.
yeah, when there's so much like generic, boring looking AAA stuff that's like very clearly like market tested for maximum profits, it's nice that we can get something like Xenoblade. And like obviously they want profit. I mean, the fact that they had such good profits over like because of Xenoblade 3, they actually gave their employees a raise, including like new graduates
Aww,
getting hired, which is pretty
aww,
pretty poggers.
that's
Yeah,
so
so
good.
yeah, so
Yeah,
it's like obviously they want money, um, but like it's obvious that they're not as like market tested as
yeah,
these other things. They make what they want to make, and it resonates with
yeah,
people, and then the word of mouth is it speaks for itself. You know, like the
yeah,
the the games do better and better. They do well because people like them and because they resonate with people. And I think that's more important from like an artistic creator standpoint than just like making whatever makes money, which is like most of the industry.
yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we better wrap up here. I actually realized I'm like way over time. I've got an appointment in 10 minutes. I need to rush to.
Oh,
So
holy crap!
yeah, I forgot about that. I didn't think we'd be going this long. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me on this days. This has been like such a great chat, and I hope lots of people enjoy this podcast we've recorded.
Yeah, it's been fun. As the two woke Xenoblade fans, I think we did a good job.
Yeah,
You know,
we got to share this around, get people invested in our woke agenda.
true. Yeah, we uncovered the game. We figured it out. You know,
Yeah,
we won.
Takahashi, just like send us an email to let us know that we figured it out and validate our feeling. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. I would love to do more podcasts like this if we can find another topic we're passionate about. Because yeah, it's been great talking with you. Um, yeah, I guess we'll wrap things up there. Any last
Yeah,
words?
I had a great time. Thanks for having me on. If you want to follow me at Days3X on my Twitter.
Yes.
Although it's not Twitter anymore, it's X. So that might be a problem.
I,
Um,
do you have a Mastodon or anything like that?
no, I joined Threads. I don't use it very much because it's like not a good platform. And
Yeah.
it's also hard to manage a lot of social medias. I don't know. I have a Discord, Days3X as well.
Hmm.
I think they got rid of the numbers, so you might be able to find me just by using Days3X. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, they did. All
Yeah,
right,
if you
all
want to DM
good.
me, I like having friends. If you want to DM me, you could do that.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thank you once again for being on here, and thank you to anybody who watched this podcast. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them in the comments below. We'd be happy to hear from you. No hate, please. Let's be
Yeah,
civil. But yeah, I would love
nobody
to
figured
discuss
out
this game.
nobody figured out the game like we did. But if for some reason you did, leave a comment explaining what we missed.
Yeah, tell us how wrong we are in the comments. I don't know. Well, just shit talking now. All right, let's wrap this up. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And yeah, hopefully, we'll be doing more podcasts like this in the future. But yeah, thanks for now, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye,
Yep.
everybody.